Welcome to the second panel of the International Conference of the Schiller Institute, entitled All Moral Resources of Humanity Have to be Called Up. Mankind must be the immortal species. Our second panel is entitled The Science of Physical Economy. My name is Claudio Celani. I'm talking to you from Wiesbaden, Germany. And I say good evening to all European viewers and African viewers. I say good afternoon to our viewers in the Western Hemisphere, and somebody in Eurasia or Asia must be deep in the night and even early in the morning. So to those who are up, I say good morning, even if the lark has not yet sung, as Shakespeare would say. So let me go straight into our panel, which, as I said, is entitled The Science of the Physical Economy. And it starts with an overview of the global economic crisis to go into the cases of Afghanistan and Haiti, which you heard from the first panel, represent now a most urgent case of desperate need for intervention for emergency, but also for a perspective for development. Then we will go also into the health crisis. So let me start then by introducing the first speaker, who is Paul Gallagher, who is speaking from the United States. He's the co-editor of the Executive Intelligence Review, and his address is entitled Stopping Today's Hyperinflationary Policies. Go ahead, Paul.
We must stop the impulse of hyperinflation before a blowout. Ironically, on Wednesday, President Joe Biden named a new, quote, top priority, reversing inflation, unquote. He said he would tell American regulators to clamp down on speculation, to push energy prices down, etc. Many commentaries said he sounded like he was in China, where this has recently been done. Perhaps Biden wished. A heuristic device showing why rapid inflation and even hyperinflationary breakdowns occur was introduced by Lyndon LaRouche in the 1990s and called by him the triple curve typical collapse function. The diagram there appears to be a simple one. But the current storms of inflation, which are threatening millions of lives as they hit fertilizer and food, household heating and electric power, can't be stalked to their origin and cause without understanding LaRouche's typical collapse function. He introduced it as part of a general forecast he made of approaching conditions for a financial and economic breakdown crisis. And indeed, the years that followed were marked by continuous debt bubble collapses. The Asian crisis stock collapses, the Russian and Brazilian bond defaults, the dot-com bubble collapse, leading to the US home foreclosure crisis and the global financial collapse of September 2008. LaRouche, 14 months before that global collapse, had declared it to be a certainty in an international webcast like this one. Therefore, the economic actions he demanded after introducing this triple curve in order to stop its fatal collapse are critical now. I will return to this in the course of this discussion. Recall August 2019, when the world's leading central bankers and private mega bankers met at their annual policy conference in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. They were deeply and publicly worried that the transatlantic economies, along with Japan, Korea, Australia, were falling into ruinous, irreversible deflation. That sounds like a long time ago now. Leaders at that conference, Bank of England chief Mark Carney, and a gang of 4 BlackRock executives who were all former central bankers in Europe, declared that the major central banks had to seize authorities from governments. They themselves named this a, quote, regime change, unquote, in order to create demand and create inflation at all costs. Their strategies were unrestricted central bank issuance of helicopter money for specific emergency spending purposes, the BlackRock bankers, and the creation of central bank synthetic digital currency, Carney. So the waves of inflation that have been breaking over the past year or so are intentional, and these central banks have driven them. Here is the inflation of the price of 20 globally important commodities over the course of this century to date, leaving out the years immediately around the crash of 2008 and the Great Recession. The price measuring point in each year is July. The first period, 1000 to 05, shows significant inflation, quote, warm inflation, shown here by pink color. The average commodity across the 20 inflates at 11% per year going into the 2007-08 crash. Then the decade 2009 to 19, no inflation at all of these commodities. Then the 2 years 2019 to 21, rather suddenly, hot inflation. The average commodity inflates at 30% per year. And then for these past 3 months, July 15th to October 15th, very hot inflation. The average commodity inflating at perhaps 125% per year if it were to continue. This rapid and rising inflationary surge is across the board. Energy commodities are inflating faster than most others, but no one speculative market explains this. There definitely are speculations playing big roles, but the surging inflation is across the board and not proving at all transitory. What were these central banks deciding to do in 2019? They were and are trying to inflate away this bubble of global total debt, which grew by 40 trillion or 20% in just 3 years, 2015 to 18. Rather than reorganize this debt by Glass-Steagall bank reorganizations, by write-downs and speculations, and by issuing new credit for high productivity infrastructure projects needed in the world, their choice was to inflate it and replace it with a gigantic new, quote, green finance, unquote, bubble. Their fear was, had deflation set in for years, with that immense global everything bubble of debt and very little new productive investment outside China's Belt and Road, mass corporate and sovereign defaults would have buried the banking systems in their own speculations. So the central banks created this inflation intentionally. But they did not see and do not admit now that their regime change policy, combined with extreme pressure for a global Green New Deal and aimed at creating a green finance bubble of debt assets and spending, is a failure and an economic chaos they can't control. Similarly, just a century ago, the German Reichsbank's creation of high inflation was intentional, printing currency to reflate away Germany's World War I debts. But the French-Belgian seizure in early 1923 of the Rhineland, the core of Germany's industrial production, within less than a year allowed this inflationary money printing to turn into a monstrous and uncontrolled hyperinflation, which wiped out the household wealth of the German population. Again, this highlights the importance of LaRouche's triple curve typical collapse function, as we will see. In October 2019, after a month of liquidity lending, so-called repo operations, which poured hundreds of billions into the interbank lending market every night, the Federal Reserve began what it insisted was, quote, not quantitative easing. It was not QE, unquote. And indeed, it quickly got bigger than QE, adding 500 billion in electronic currency issue from October 2019 to February 2020. That was before the pandemic economic plunge. From March on, it became a deluge from the Federal Reserve, European Central Bank, Bank of England, Bank of Japan, pouring out 10 trillion in new money issuance in 18 months, a rate of money printing that tripled any quantitative easing program of the previous decade. The United States alone, at the same time, added some 5 trillion in new treasury borrowing and spending on, quote, COVID relief, unquote, essentially in partnership with the Federal Reserve, which supported and bought these new debt issues. There was no creation of productive employment in any sector. Now consider again who the leaders of this regime change strategy rolled out at Jackson Hole in August 2019 were. Mark Carney, of all prominent international bankers, the most devoted and even obsessed, quote, climate warrior, unquote, as the British press have called him, a co-author of the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement. And the bankers working at BlackRock, the world's biggest money management firm and the most aggressive at forcing investment out of fossil fuels. The two policies have gone together. Regime change, that is, central banks taking over from governments the crucial task of directing and incentivizing investment on a large scale, with government expected to support this with regulations, tax pledges, etc. And the global Green Deal. Regime change became Great Reset. There was a very real shutdown outside the powerful resistors, China, Russia, and India, of investment into fossil fuels, fossil fuel power production, and intensive development of agricultural land. This has caused energy hyperinflation and economic havoc and breakdowns, and has cost many human lives. Even the African leaders who denounced the green impositions on their countries acknowledged their real implementation. Listen to Nigerian Vice President Yemi Osinbajo, quote, Nigeria is being forced to deny itself the benefit of its own resources. Africa's progress could be undone by the rich world's efforts to curb investments in all fossil fuels, unquote. Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni said the same thing in a Wall Street Journal op-ed. South Africa's president signed at Glasgow an accelerated shutdown of that country's great coal production. In the United States, coal dropped by the end of 2020 to 15% of national power generation from 39% just 2 years earlier, and so on. Investment in intermittent power sources went on frenetically, however, worldwide at the same time. The International Energy Agency smilingly reported that a disastrous 90% of global electric power additions in 2020-21 have been wind parks, solar farms, and gas turbine plants to back up their intermittence. Obviously, the COVID pandemic caused a sharp plunge in the productive economies of the entire world. But nowhere in the leading economies of North America and Europe were any infrastructure projects launched to restore productive employment. Desperately needed hospitals around the world were not built against the pandemic, despite China's example. Public funds were all thrown into relief and wage substitution. There was just that one exception, larger and larger wind and solar projects and their Sancho Panzas, the natural gas turbines. It's painfully clear that these investments have failed the real economy and through storms of inflation have now caused energy, power, and transport chaos and threatened already depleted food production. These investments have proven to lower general economic productivity, and that hits the economy harder and longer than a simple temporary shrinkage of economic activity. Now look again at Lyndon LaRouche's triple curve, typical economic collapse function. LaRouche simply showed that when, on the same timeline as in the last 2 years, the real productive economy is in accelerating decline, while both debt assets, called here financial aggregates, and currency issuances needed to liquefy those debt assets rise at accelerating rates. Then a general financial and economic collapse is looming. And in the special case shown at those circles, that the mass of monetary aggregates through money printing is artificially caused to expand even faster than the debt it is supporting, a hyperinflationary blowout is threatening. This is the picture of the current inflation and what it forebodes. The response from the largest banks, fund managers, pension funds was clear at the Glasgow summit: to ignore the chaos and inflation and demand a bigger, faster, quote, shift of the trillions, unquote, out of anything producing carbon and upholding human life and human population numbers and into green finance. Prince Charles, the most influential green dealer in the world, who also has the world's largest carbon footprint, spoke for them, quote, climate change and biodiversity loss pose an even greater existential threat than the COVID-19 pandemic, to the extent that we have to put ourselves on a warlike footing. With a growing global population creating ever-increasing demand on the planet's finite resources, we have to reduce emissions urgently. We know this will take trillions, not billions of dollars. Here, what is needed is a vast military-style campaign to marshal the strength of the global financial sector. With trillions at its disposal, far beyond global GDP, and with the greatest respect, beyond even the governments of the world's leaders, it offers the only real prospect of achieving fundamental economic transition. Now, there's a historical model for this, quote, fundamental economic transition, unquote. I mentioned earlier the German hyperinflation of the early 1920s. The central banker who came in 1924 and stopped that with a new currency and a very painful austerity policy against households and the economy was named Hjalmar Schacht. Later in the 1920s, this powerful figure resigned his position to support Hitler's Nazis and to play a major moneybags role in bringing them into power. Schacht then, in 1933, reassumed control of the Reichsbank and became the Nazi economics minister as well. He quickly launched a blizzard issuance of central bank currency, combined with shifting of regimented labor through the Nazis' labor front to drive capital into rearmament and weapons production. Arms production shot from 2% of German GDP to 20% in just the 2 years, 1933 to 35. Wages and prices were, of course, put under controls. This Schachtian central bank economics is the only historical model for the current drive by the global green dealers to, quote, shift the trillions, unquote, out of every form of carbon-related industrial production or land husbandry and into an immense green finance bubble of new debt backed up by government tax money and regulation. Schachtian economics is the core of fascism, where the greatest financial conglomerates co-opt the powers of governments to increase their looting and to reduce labor costs and human costs of economic activity. Lyndon LaRouche was the tribune against the return of Schachtian economics for 50 years. When President Richard Nixon in 1971 ended the US dollar's gold reserve basis, he struck down President Franklin Roosevelt's highly productive Bretton Woods monetary system. Nixon implemented wage and price controls and pushed a political economic Southern strategy, the start of globalization, sending industrial jobs south to cheaper labor pools. Lyndon LaRouche immediately then denounced, and throughout the 1970s, that this was leading back to Schachtian fascist economics, to wars and potential pandemics, and to depression. LaRouche became prominent by confronting dominant Keynesian economists who were admirers of Schacht for his so-called public work creation and his trade policies. LaRouche's warnings and legislative proposals to stop the crash in 2007-08 were blocked. So he defined how to prevent another worse financial and economic breakdown, the one now coming at us. First, break up the biggest banks by Glass-Steagall Acts. These are the banks of Mark Carney's so-called alliance to push the trillions into green finance. And they are huge zombies, much too big for the central banks to let them fail, and much too big to lend. They simply speculate. This, Glass-Steagall, will be the biggest blow to the green bubble. Second, long-term nation-to-nation energy contracts, such as the Russia-Europe gas contracts, which, contrary to the propaganda nonsense, just this week brought the natural gas price down by 10% in Europe. And third, a, quote, new Bretton Woods, unquote, a credit agreement among major economic and technological powers to stabilize exchange rates and to provide credit for new infrastructure projects. Immediately, a modern system of healthcare facilities in every nation, and emphatically producing new nuclear fission power plants and advancing fusion power development.
Thank you, Paul. I think we should include in the LaRouche collapse function also the cost of the regime wars which have been launched in the last decades. Only for the Afghanistan war, $2.3 trillion have been spent in the most unproductive investment, which is the destruction of wealth and human beings. And so we come to the topic of the three next speakers, who will talk to us about the situation in Afghanistan and proposals and ideas, both for emergency intervention now and for the longer term development perspective. I remind all the viewers who just connected that you are watching the second panel of the International Schiller Institute conference. Our panel is entitled The Science of the Physical Economy. So our next speaker is Professor Pino Arlacchi from Italy. He has been the Deputy General Secretary of the United Nations, Director of the UN Office for Drug Control and Crime Prevention, and he has also been the Rapporteur for the European Parliament on Afghanistan. So he has a lot of experience there, and he will talk about avoiding the coming catastrophe in Afghanistan. Mr. Arlacchi, Professor Arlacchi, will speak in a taped interview, which we have taped already.
I believe that the UN agencies are saying the truth about Afghanistan today. The situation is tragic because winter is very tough in all the country. I know the country very well. And the Taliban are just there since a few months. And there is just a very, very small number of initiatives in terms of humanitarian aid from neighboring countries. They are the only one that I am aware of. The European Union committed to continue to invest around $1 billion a year in non-military aid to Afghanistan, like the Union is doing since a long time. But I'm not seeing any confirmation about this and any plan to spend this figure in an emergency situation. USA, really, I don't know, because the Americans are completely silent. They are showing lack of responsibility on a country that they occupied, they took care of for 20 years. It's really astonishing, their behavior. They behave like they've never been there. And so on the table outside Afghanistan, there is only this issue, this small flow of humanitarian aid from neighboring countries. There are also other forms of relief that could be put in place. First of all, giving back to Afghanistan their money, the Central Bank of Afghanistan money that is frozen, is at least $4 billion, frozen by the Americans. And I mean, it's a substantial amount of money. Don't forget, the GDP of Afghanistan This is just 20 million. So they're freezing a substantial part of their own money, their own GDP. And I really do not understand why they continue to do so. I mean, they don't want to give the money to the Taliban, but humanitarian aid can be delivered straight to the population. There are many ways to do not involve the government in that. And then this makes really this action almost a crime, this inaction almost a crime. No, I'm a bit skeptical. Whatever they do on the issue of drugs is too late. It means that they have to wait at least until April to get something to sell in the market. Even if they decide to do not, and this is also too late, stop the sowing, the cultivation, the seeds, the planting of the seeds of opium, it's too late. I mean, they have to wait anyway until they have the crop and they can sell it. It means that in the meantime, we have had a human disaster in the country. So I don't believe this is a real danger for the moment. The real danger, as I said, is the total indifference and the cynical calculation to starve the population in order to change regime. And this is the worst hypothesis. And I'm afraid that can concretize. To have a collective punishment of people is one of the most horrible international crime according to international law. You cannot punish a population because they have a government that you don't like. Even in extreme situation in the past, for instance, North Korea and so on, international community was able to organize when they got a big problem. 15 years ago, there was a lack of food all over the country. International community intervened, even if the government was completely outcast, North Korean government. I'm really surprised badly by the fact that if they don't intervene in Afghanistan, they establish a very bad precedent. It would be the first time in which a big humanitarian crisis is not met by the international community. It is at least something that is moving on. Maybe it's positive because Afghanistan should be treated as a regional issue. Neighboring countries of the region should take care, first of all, of Afghanistan. Now, Europeans and Americans should also intervene and be active part of the reconstruction of the country. But this should occur just because they ran the country for 20 years. So they have a responsibility. Urgent financial intervention, funding UN agencies that are already on the spot, funding quickly NGOs and Afghan entities that distribute food and medicine, shelter for the people who need that, and defreezing immediately the money that belongs to the African people frozen by the Americans. The West should help a reconstruction of the country. The country was already in very bad shape in the October 2001 when the American invaded the country. So you have a country that is destroyed by more than 30 years of civil war and by foreign invasion. That has to be rebuilt from the scratch. Even if there is some kind of development, urban development, for instance, Kabul changed, now is a much bigger city than it was 20 or 30 years ago. But most of the not urban, the rural Afghanistan is as it was at least 10 years ago. There are more schools, of course. There was a progress, but this progress was absolutely natural. It was all the region that grew in the last 20 years. Afghanistan just grew at a rate a bit lower than the rest of the region. So reconstruction, a big reconstruction plan for Afghanistan, taking care of the resources of the country that are relevant. Afghanistan is one of the poorest countries in the world, but this is because of the tragedy of the civil war. Potentially is a country that could be a middle income country in a relatively quick, short time, not more than 10, 15 years. Afghanistan could be completely different. It has natural resources. It has a lot of people who emigrated that can come back, bringing a lot of resources. And also is a country with a big potential, particularly in agriculture and small industry. I hope they will not do this operation that they did also in the past. They will push Afghanistan in the hands of China and Russia because they could be the only two great power who take care of the country. And then blame Afghanistan because it moved on the so-called other side. So they basically create the threat, and then they go to fight the threat, and maybe ask the Europeans to help them in fighting a threat that they themselves created. Since they did it in the last 30 years all over, the Americans, first they create the threats, and they ask help, they offer protection from the same threat. I hope they will not repeat this with Afghanistan.
Thank you, Professor Arlacchi. We taped this interview 2 days ago because today Pino Arlacchi had a previous engagement in Italy. He promised, however, that if he can, he could join us shortly for the discussion. And now we go to the next speaker, who is Mrs. Amna Malik, who is president of the Center of Pakistan and International Relations, and she will speak on the topic Socio-Economic Conditions in Afghanistan and the role of the global community.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. My name is Amna Malik, the President, Center of Pakistan and International Relations. Today, the topic of my discussion is socio-economic condition in Afghanistan and the role of global community. We all know the withdrawal of US and NATO troops on 15th August 2021. A new interim Taliban-led government is now in power in Afghanistan. The flows of international aid and development assistance, which the country largely depended on for its advancement prior to 15th August 2021, have been almost entirely disrupted. The international donor agencies like World Bank, the IMF, the Asian Development Bank, and EU decided to freeze budgeted project funding payments to Afghanistan. Afghanistan owns assets abroad as well as official development assistance plan. Therefore, after US withdrawal, there is a new need of a new phase of reconstruction and state rebuilding in Afghanistan may hence be passed on to other regional players such as Pakistan, China, and Russia. If we talk about the governance under Taliban, which is highly totalitarian, there are no available positions for other ethnic groups like women and minorities. This has highlighted Taliban neglect of the civil and political rights of the population and demonstrated their refusal to compromise. In a country where 75% of the population live in rural areas, state-centric development funding has failed to reach those population in dire need of services. Rural communities have often been neglected in social political development programs, further undermining the legitimacy of the central government. This has resulted in minimal improvement in areas where poverty and radicalization have negatively impact the socio-economic status of the people's lives and maintain ripe conditions for insurgency. The world needs to awaken on this call. Afghanistan economic condition, if we talk about, this is amongst the poorest nation, deprived of basic health, education, and standard of living. At present, the Afghan economy does not produce enough revenue to provide even basic needs such as food and power for its citizens. The country is in desperate need for foreign assistance in order to spur renewal and growth. Human insecurities in Afghanistan, if we talk about, with the collapse of the republic system installed in Afghanistan, the country now faces a humanitarian identity and human rights crisis. Protracted conflict and continued instability combined with the recent political upheaval and humanitarian and economic crisis have caused fear and frustration among a large segment of the population. Additionally, the break of connectivity with domestic and international market, along with the cessation of foreign aid and investment into the country, have damaged productive activities. More than 120,000 people have been evacuated from Afghanistan, including qualified professionals in social, economic, and political sectors. Quite unfortunate situations. So here, as the president of COPER, I have certain recommendations for the international community. First of all, to address this human insecurity in Afghanistan, the international community should develop a policy of engagement with human security-led goals, acknowledging the context and culture in Afghanistan. Policies and approaches related to assistance should be people-focused, not state-focused. Humanitarian assistance needs to address food and health insecurity and utilize international organizations and humanitarian NGOs with outreach to rural areas. These programs should provide basic services related to health, food, shelter for internally displaced population and those in dire need of assistance. Programs should also include a discourse component to provide a safe opportunity for individuals from different sectors to engage in critical reflection and dialogue on social economic conditions. For a well-coordinated humanitarian and development assistance, I believe approach should be that the international community should convene a donors platform to galvanize the world to help Afghan civil society and humanitarian organizations develop a consistent plan with pragmatic benchmarks and long-term continued support to address this human security crisis and involve the stakeholders in the decision-making like women and minorities. Furthermore, development projects should be channelized and implemented through civil society organizations and provide realistic and achievable benchmark. The development model should be designed based on the social and economic realities of each province and ethnic community. Programs should require the local community that receive aid to contribute in time and in kind to development projects that they need in their communities. Furthermore, measures to immediately counteract the food and health crisis by organizing aid in the amount needed and by channels acceptable to all the sides. Furthermore, securing the resumption of the financial flows by providing refinancing and cash to banks in the economy, which is largely cash based and in which only 15% of the population have access to traditional banking services. Partnering with foreign academic institutions and government for providing tertiary education and health facility in Afghanistan. How Pakistan play its role in peace building. Troika Plus, Islamabad hosting a meeting comprising Pakistan, China, Russia, and United States to discuss the latest situation in Afghanistan. Pakistan has always supported as a government peace and regional cooperation and economic stability in Afghanistan. There are certain practical policy recommendations for the government of Pakistan. Development and rehabilitation of Afghanistan through A. Regional cooperation for economic relief, B. Humanitarian assistance package, C. Enhancing role of regional organization, D. Protection and security of investors, E. Focus on long-term economic goals, F. Support for inclusive development, Support for development assistance project, and finally, connectivity through transportation infrastructure. At the end, I would like to say that peace in Afghanistan is peace in South Asia and peace in the world. Regional and global power should form a unified and collective approach to deal with Afghanistan issue. We as an organization is joining hands with Schiller Institute for their initiative for the humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Malik. For the protocol, I forgot to say that Mrs. Malik, of course, is from Pakistan. And now let's go quick to the second speaker, next speaker, who is Dr. Sham Merabi, and he's from Afghanistan. He's a member of the Board of Governors of the Central Bank of Afghanistan, and he's the chairman of the Audit Committee. He will speak on the topic, how to avoid the collapsing economy and humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. Please, Mr. Merabi.
Okay. Good evening to our colleagues in Europe, and good afternoon to our listeners and participants in the United States. I'm very pleased to be here in this important role that we need to, as an international community, play in trying to rescue Afghanistan from collapsing further the economy, which is in a state of free fall. I think it's to set up the context of what I would like to talk about is to briefly, in a brief fashion, three issues that I would like to raise. One is what existed prior to August 15 with regard to the economy. I'm an economist, so most of my focus will be there with regard to economy. Now, I think a lot of people need to realize that economic conditions that existed prior to August 15 were deteriorating gradually and substantially. And the factors responsible for bringing this downturn, one was drought. Now, drought, majority of the provinces were affected. I think it was 25 out of 34. So that created quite a bit of problem because here, drought, we had, we don't have a really irrigated system. So you rely heavily on rain and fall and snow. Now, so the impact of this was already felt by both rain-fed farming as well as the livestock. So that already contracted the agriculture sector. And in the limited irrigated farming that we have has also experienced substantially low growth rate. Now, and that what happened also, we had a limited amount, Afghanistan, a limited amount of investment in irrigation, rehabilitation, that also clearly was in a state of decline in the food and agriculture products and all this that Afghanistan embarked on food processing sector that also technically came to a full stop. So the severe drought and confidence, the lack of confidence, let's put it this way, and then also lack of investment as a result of conflict, it resulted in a negative growth for the economy. And as a matter of fact, it depends on how you look at a projection. It is anywhere between 10 to 12%, and some have projected that indeed it could go up to 30%. A negative growth of 30% could materialize if something is not done to the economy. So you're looking at this contraction and the impact of that on the population: immense poverty, starvation, and famine. So you're looking at the economy that heavily relied on donors' assistance. The government, during the 20 years that the United States was in Afghanistan, could not generate enough revenue to be able to pay for its operating costs. So you're talking about over 40% of the operating expenses, up to 60% came from United States, and the rest of it from the revenue of customs and also other income taxes and so on. So you had a situation that the economy was not self-sufficient to begin with. Now, then you had this crisis of a massive exodus of United States that came into being, and as a result of that, international community embarked on freezing Afghanistan assets, and as well as IMF, the 460 SDR, they were blocked, and World Bank stopped funding the projects, the main important sector, health sector and education sector, and the salaries of all these people actually will stop. So I had argued, and this was, I was 16 or 17, I think, in my writing as well as my interview with Reuters, BBC, and CNN and Bloomberg. I argued at that time that unless the Central Bank of Afghanistan is allowed to access its own dollar reserve. Now, remember, this is not the money, taxpayers' money of the United States. This is Afghanistan earned money. It belongs to the people of Afghanistan. I argued at that time that those should be released by Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and otherwise we will see, as I projected at that time, based on the data that we had at our disposal, that we will have spiral price increases, which we have. I said that there will be food shortages, which we have, and they said that currency will depreciate, which it has, and bank closure could come into being. To some extent, I think you have been somewhat lucky. There was some money reserve, some reserve were left in the central bank. When the new regime came into power, as a chairman of the audit committee of the bank, I got my Comptroller General to go ahead and lock the vault and to give an accounting of all those domestic currency as well as foreign reserves that we had along with the gold. So we had a good accounting of what existed, and then sealed the bank till the new regime came, and then we opened it, and we actually have a good accounting of everything that was there prior to closure existed in the vault. So in that context, we had some cushion. That cushion is not going to last that long to be able to go ahead and bring price stability. You see, what happens here is that the Central Bank of Afghanistan has limited monetary tools to be able to control prices. And the instrument that has been used in the 20 years that I've been there, and a very effective instrument, and that was to be able to auction off dollars, to accumulate Afghanis, and to be able to reduce the impact on currency depreciation, and to be able to bring stability in prices. And that has given Afghanistan a very good record with regard to bringing down inflation at a single digit. And as a matter of fact, if one was to compare the prices of goods of Afghanistan with that of Pakistan, Iran, and other neighboring countries, Afghanistan had a good record as in achieving price stability. Prices are not that high. That has not continued as I projected. It will not continue. Afghanistan depreciated. Prices have gone up. Food, fuel, shelter. You heard the media constantly talk about that. It continues. So the lack of dollar in a market has caused importers not to be able to pay for the basic necessity of goods, and why the regime restricted the amount of goods that could be imported because of lack of hard currency to be able to pay for those particular imports. So, and also another safeguard is that, well, let's try to not allow people to have as much access to their saving, because having too much access to saving will dwindle the limited amount of reserve that are there. So what needs to be done at this stage is that we should, as I've also argued, that we should allow this reserve to be released on a limited. Now, as I have said here, argued very effectively, I think it has been carried out by most of the media as well. In the exact point that I said, it has to be, we have to allow limited, monitored release of reserve to pay for essential imports, and in addition, to allow central bank to engage in this foreign, what I call an auction process, to be able to control currency depreciation and to stabilize prices. And I had suggested $150 million. That is less than half of what we used to do that, and what we used to auction. And what you could do with that is that you can monitor it. We have international auditing firm, and the top of it auction is it's an electronic auction. It has been very transparent. It is very easy to monitor, and at the top of it, you can get an international auditing firm to give you further assurance and to verify that indeed the money is used for that particular purpose. After all, inflation affects the poor people. It affects the children. It affects the women who need to feed their children. It affects everyone. So why put a strangling hold on the economy overall? Why not allow this dollar auction to prop up the value of Afghani, to help the needs of ordinary Afghans? Now, the needs of the ordinary Afghans facing food security would have to be the main target in focus point here. And also I've argued that this political recognition should be delinked. Allow this process to go. Get engaged engage with Taliban as you're engaging, as the United States is engaging with Taliban and many other fronts. As a matter of fact, as you know, now Qatar will be representing the U.S. interest in Doha, and then they are also engaged in the process of trying to get the people out. They are engaged in a process of United States trying to coordinate effort to attack ISIS. So if you can engage in all these other activities, why can't you engage in the process of trying to make it easier to bring about economic security for the populace? And I think this is an important point that I have talked about. We have Afghanistan has a central bank that is independent, at least since the new regime has come into being. They have also brought in money that they collected from corrupt regime rulers of the past. As a matter of fact, they have brought in about $50 million into the central bank. That if there was some motive that they had, at least it hasn't been shown yet. Then also they collected about $200,000 from another $5,200,000. So that's not maybe that's not substantial, but nevertheless, it shows that indeed a building of trust could come into being by engaging with this particular entity. I think that's an important point to keep. At the top of that also is that indeed the focus here is mostly placed only on humanitarian aid. And I've argued that humanitarian aid is a noble cause. I think we need to pursue that. It is not a permanent solution. It is a short gap measures. The United States has invested 20 years with a lot of the taxpayers' money, and institutions were built. Why cripple those particular institutions? Channel these things to the structures that are in existence right now. And those structures have got talented people who have learned how to manage and run the institutions and how to go ahead in a central bank to be able to conduct monetary policy. I think it's a way that you can go ahead and establish that. This is the reserve part. The other part that I have also argued, donor-supported health and education programs. They were channeled through Afghan state structures. In particular, it was channeled to what was called the World Bank Afghanistan Reconstruction Trust Fund, ARTF. That is, again, it was a World Bank supported Afghanistan Reconstruction Trust Fund. And then what they did through that mechanism, there was a health and nutrition program that was funded by ARTF through the World Bank, and it was implemented through Ministry of Health. That is much better structure than dashing out money to NGOs, which doesn't become permanent. So building institution was done to a great extent. So Ministry of Public Health was able to cover 60% of the health funding and so on. And I think those kind of structures can easily be, they are there, then go ahead and use them. Why not go ahead and utilize those particular situations? So to summarize, I know I was given limited time, I could talk forever, but I'm going to summarize in some of the recommendations that I have had, and I think those recommendations are what I would like to recite. And one is an important point of recommendation that I said is that international community will have to get engaged in trying to release the reserve. Now, the reserves, the total is 9.5 billion. Now, United States has got 7.1. The rest is in Europe. I have also talked about the release of this fund from Germany, Commerzbank, and Deutsche Bank. And they have not apparently, the reporter contacted them and they did not respond. But I have given the exact amount of how many millions we have in Deutsche Bank, that is central bank has Deutsche Bank and also in Commerzbank in Germany, as well as in London. And all of that is clear data is there. I don't want to cite those things at this stage. But what we see here that the international community has invested significantly in these institutions, and I think they should continue trying to not destroy the institution and build them. Release of these reserves of both areas will have to be done. Engagement will have to take place. And I think the cooperation of regional group is very, very important. A point was brought up. As a matter of fact, now the current regime decided that since they did not have adequate USD to pay for the cost of electricity from the north, Uzbekistan and so on, they signed an agreement with Iran to buy electricity. So there's regional cooperation beside the cooperation from United States in Europe is very critical to get the economy moving again. Otherwise, we have, Europe should have, and so the United States should have very, very vested interest. These people are going to be, there will be massive refugees. It will affect the neighboring countries. It will affect Europe. They are going to go there. And then the huge cost of that is something that Europe, that Afghans could go to Turkey and then into Europe, and go to Iran and Pakistan and so on. It will be a massive exodus of people. We're talking about 35 million people that could suffer their lives and so on. So the important point, again, to finalize is that there's a great urgency that is needed to be able to avert not only this humanitarian crisis, but action to be able to, as I have argued, bring a stability for the economies overall, in trying to review the sanctioned regimes that have been devised and come up with a conditional approach of the kind in reserve release that I have suggested, so that foreign exchange reserve can be given back to the Afghan people. So I will stop here and be happy to entertain any question.
Thank you, Dr. Berabi. I think the Western central bankers should learn a lesson from you on how to control inflation. Stay with us for the Q&A period, which comes pretty soon after the next short intervention, which will be by Mr. Iliad Alexander Terra. I hope I pronounced correctly your first name, sir. And he is an American, and he's the founder and president of the Council of Global Relations.
The Council on Global Relations has been involved in Afghanistan for more than 2 decades, building capacity and supporting the Afghan people. From our perspective, what is needed is a new narrative, a narrative that states that the winning formula is peace, and that this is what we need to engage in is on a road from war to peace. This is fundamental, and the time for this is now. There is, from our perspective, no excuses and no justification not to enter in this space. The current crisis that the Afghan people are facing is quite bleak. Not only has their economy collapsed, not only are they facing multiple threats from regional influences, they have essentially a failed infrastructure and institutional lack of experience. And that just, the list goes on. We've all heard stories where Afghan families are selling their children so that they can afford and pay for food. This is not acceptable. This is not normal in modern societies and modern world community. And we need to ask the question, why is this happening? To understand why we are at this point in the crossroads, we need to have a deeper memory and look at the historic context of the Afghan crisis. Not this past 20 years, not this past 2 months, not even this past 40 years that there's been constant wars and struggles in the country, but going back centuries as to why Afghanistan is and has been the subject of the so-called Great Game, torn to shreds, divided and attempted to conquer repeatedly for various stakeholders, and why this formula has been at play and in force. Obviously, Afghanistan's geopolitical location, its natural resources, and even its human capital of its highly intelligent, capable, and currently tech-savvy population of youth. Why is it that this region has been decimated, and this country and these people are struggling in this way? And so an honest and transparent investigation and exploration needs to be done on this and shared as a way to educate and inform policy and inform solutions.
Thank you, Mr. Terra. So we have now a period of question and answer discussion. I invite the speakers to join me. We will have 20-25 minutes so we can accommodate a few questions. I see Mrs. Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute, has joined us. Hello, Helga. We have Paul Gallagher is with us. Dr. Marabi is with us. And is Dr. Terra there? Yes. So
Yes,
I
sir.
would first ask you, Helga, if you have some remarks, if you followed the presentation we had so far, and if you want to say something. You have to be unmuted, Helga.
Wait a second.
Yes, now I can hear you.
I'm not sure if I find this here.
I can
We're
hear
good.
you now, Helga.
We can hear you.
Okay, good. No, I wanted to, first of all, thank all the speakers. And I agree with Pino Arlacchi that obviously, in one sense, the development should be in the hands of the regional countries and neighbors of Afghanistan. And I think what Mrs. Malik said, and also the Merabi, I mean, the competence is clearly with the regional people who understand the culture, who, unlike the people who conducted the war, who often had no idea who they were fighting. So in one sense, it's true. It should be primarily a question of the regional countries. But I also think that there is a moral obligation by those countries who conducted the war and left Afghanistan in this horrendous situation after 20 years, that they absolutely have to contribute in whatever form it is appropriate and required. So I just would like very much that you also tell us, what plan of action do you want the world to engage in? What should the Schiller Institute do? And maybe, we should discuss very concretely, because it's an emergency situation.
Helga, so who wants to take the chance to respond first to this question?
So let me respond to Helga's question. From my perspective, I think excellent points were brought by all the speakers. I was also likewise very touched with Pino's comments, especially his passion towards really calling this a crime against humanity for some of the decisions that are being made. I do believe at the center of this conversation are the Afghan people and the current crisis, the incoming winter, the brutal winter that they're facing. And it is the responsibility of the international community and the Afghan diaspora and the Afghan people to come together in this manner. And we likewise are on the ground, boots on the ground. We have a significant presence there. And we are looking forward to collaborating with Schiller Institute and other colleagues. And engagement is a path forward from our perspective. And I would like also to add one comment to Dr. Merabi's comment in terms of the contributing causes of the economic collapse, and that was well thought out in terms of the drought and its impact on agriculture and etc. But there was another contributing element, and that was corruption, pervasive corruption that was both domestic and international, that impacted, and we've heard all the stories. So it's positive, this remark in terms of what's happening in the central bank right now, and the transparency, and we need more of that. And both the Afghan community and Afghan leaders, diaspora members, and the international community must collaborate and absolutely release, unfreeze the Afghan people's assets, and help build on the progress that has been achieved, and improve and eliminate the negatives of the past 20 years. So very good panel here.
Dr. Merabi, if you want to answer to Mr. Terra, I have also another question for you, which came through Zoom from a viewer. And just let me read it to you. why doesn't the UN demand that the World Bank release the funds that are illegally being withheld from Afghanistan, since it has the relevant means to do so? Maybe you can answer this.
I think I'm not in favor of having another institution, even UN, to replace the current structure. I think there's a central bank. The central bank can be tested, and under the current regime, see if it can form its functions. There are two things that I'm opposed. Now, one is that has been suggested that a commercial bank could be allowed to engage in auctioning, and transfer of fund could be done to the hands of one of the commercial banks. I totally oppose creating a new structure within this existing structure. The same thing is, I think United Nations is not equipped. I think they have done a fairly good job overall, I assume, in terms of trying to get this international community to take some important steps, and I think they are commendable. $1.2 billion in donor pledges that in September, so that they can handle the humanitarian crisis. I think that should be relegated to them, as all United States, United Nations can help Afghans in that area of bringing some relief. I think I would argue that indeed a constructive engagement in the area of trying to target first reduction of or coming up with a mechanism to address this sanctions is a way forward to be able to come up with some understanding, and then allow the regime to be able to have a breathing room through engagement, to be able to come up with some of the what has been argued leverage, if you want to use that as leverage. I don't know if the United States did not have leverage when they were there for 20 years. There was corruption. The point that my colleague was raised was a very valid one. There were conferences held that I attended. I was a senior economic advisor to two ministers of finance. We had conferences, elaborate conferences in London, Germany, Geneva, Japan, and the donors would dash out money and they will ask for transparency, and the corrupt, that is the United States as well as other Europeans, did not go ahead and enforce the benchmarks that should have been attained without those siphoning off the major part of the money that was allocated for purpose of bringing transparency or for building institutional structures. That did not happen. As to whether the United States will still have a leverage to be able to on Taliban is an open question. But the important point here is not to neglect the impact that it would have on the ordinary Afghans. So sanction is a very important part of this particular equation. So what Helga was mentioning, what needs to be done, I think that is one area that needs to be focused at the international level as well as at the U.S. level, whatever it takes to put pressure on that. And Europeans, I think, are starting an office or mission in Kabul, which I think is a positive move. United States have decided not to open any offices in Kabul, but they opened office in Doha, which I had a talk with the embassy people there as well. So I think that, and then again, this trust building mechanism will have to be done through the institution with releasing reserve. And I think Europeans should start. Somebody will have to put pressure on the banks that we have in the banks that have reserve of Afghanistan with them to release those particular funds on an incrementally basis and monitored basis as well. That is in Germany, specifically in also in Europe. I think that will have to be, and then also, as I said, moving to the humanitarian area, humanitarian assistance will have to also be done through similar structure that existed before that still is there, ERTF, and give the funding and test them. Let's try to test and see what results could be attained. So far, at least the data shows that the amount of expenditure that has been collected, even though with the border closure, has been fairly good. That export is increasing, is not bringing adequate fund that will get the economy to be able to survive for a very long period of time. But there have been some measures that are taken that seems to be positive steps.
Thank you, Dr. Merabi. I want to inform you that we are already starting putting pressure on European banks. We started with Commerzbank and we called them up. We want also to make a day of action, but if you have a list of all those banks, please send them to us, give them to us, and we will take care. Now I have another question from Bobby for Paul Gallagher. I'm watching more and more people seeking inflationary protection by investing in the speculation of cryptocurrencies. They all believe it's quote unquote outside of the central banking system. To me, it is the central banking system. It is the central banking system. It is the central banking criminals conditioning us for a transition to a new digital currency. Is this correct? And is this the plan to replace the dollar with a digital currency? If that's true, why would I not invest myself?
Can you hear me?
I have a related question, Paul. What is the connection between hyperinflationary economic policies and the disruption of the development of Afghanistan? Could Afghanistan issue a currency bonded to its natural resources?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, okay. Well, on the first question, I'm more interested in the second. I would like to, if I can, propose a certain idea or development, a hypothetical, let's say, to Mr. Merabi, that goes directly to this second question. On the first question, I completely agree. I wrote about this, maybe 2-3 years ago already in the EIR, that all of these digital currencies were trial balloons, let's put it that way, for what could become central bank controlled digital currencies. And of course, all of the major central banks are preparing those. That was a major part of what Mark Carney talked about at that 2019 bankers meeting that I described. He said that the central banks needed to have their own global synthetic central bank currency in order to inflate the dollar, to use it to inflate the dollar. So yes, I completely agree with regard to what was said about Bitcoin, for example. But on the second question, if I could just pose something and see what Mr. Merabi thinks of it. If the Afghan central bank were to, by the release of its assets, recover the ability to stabilize its currency by selling dollars, as he described, well, tomorrow or day after tomorrow, we have a meeting, a virtual meeting, but an unusual meeting between the presidents of the United States and China. Now, let us, since this is what we are fighting for, let us propose that those two presidents agree that an institution in China, say the China Development Bank, and an institution in the United States, say the International Development Finance Corporation, should each jointly issue a credit for the long-term project of building the railroad and associated electric power lines and so forth from Tashkent to Kabul and over into Peshawar and the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, a major economic development infrastructure plan for the country. Could those, or let us even say that they agree that they will prevail on the World Bank, which has been asked to fund this project, to do it. $5 billion, I think, is what has been talked about. Could that not then be directly, those credits go directly to the Afghanistan Bank, the central bank, which could, it would seem to me, add to them from domestic sources by its own ability to borrow domestically, and could manage that project, could manage the credit of that project. And if we were to see something like that happening, And if any American engineering firms, for example, were to get involved in such projects that were being funded in this way, then they in turn would have to go to their major banks and ask for loans. And that would put a pressure on those banks, which are not lending money now, to do so. So I think that the Afghan Central Bank could very easily be in the central role in the flow of credit to exactly such development projects as have been discussed, as I've just referenced. And I'd like to know what he would think of that.
Well, I think it's there are two ways of addressing this issue. One is, I think, is the short run, and then the long run. I think mostly the point that you're raising with regard to projects and so on is not going to be a short-term solution, but a solution that actually can be examined, and I think it could bring fruitful results in the long run. But the immediate issue that I see is having, rather than having a structure and working on this an implementation of a new structure, we cannot wait for that long. Obviously, there's a lot of good things that could come from the long run solution of beside the humanitarian aid, that China's huge Belt and Road initiatives that could provide Afghanistan with long-term economic viability as well. So in that, Afghanistan was not allowed there before, but BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, which Beijing pledged over, I think, was $60 billion or so for infrastructure in Pakistan. That also could be instrumental in the long run, beside what I said about the RTF and channeling those or to Project Afghanistan. But to add us all of that, it goes back to sanctions again. You've got the United States that have imposed severe sanctions. No country is going to act unless those sanctions are addressed in releasing of these particular, not only funds, but also allowing other banks to be able to go ahead and engage in the process of transaction with the central bank of Afghanistan. Now, look, we had remittances. Remittances, they constitute about 4% of GDP of the United States. When Western Union decided that because of United States pressure, first decided that no remittances would be allowed. It really brought even more hardship because a lot of people this was their one other means of livelihood for them. So the United States decided, okay, well, we'll allow Western Union then to go ahead and allow this transaction to take place. So going back, it has to be addressed first and foremost that this thing of only release of sanctions in humanitarian area is not the true solution. All the sanctions will have to be examined by the United Nations as well as by the Treasury Department of the United States in trying to come up with not only a short-term, but definitely a long-term solution.
Thank you, Mr. Marabi. So the next question comes from New York City. And it's a little bit long, but I'm going to read it. The world has seen the giant 20-year mistake that the United States has committed in Afghanistan and sees what it's doing to Haiti now. Is the international community afraid to react and condemn the United States for what it has done? Why does the international community allow the United States and, of course, the British to continue bullying other countries? I ask this to understand what role young people and others who are very active in protesting internationally might play in calling attention to the situation before it's too late. Jose asked this question. Maybe Helga, you want to answer this question?
Well, I think that, with many years of experience with cowardice, I think it's, you find a lot of people who say privately, what you are saying is absolutely truthful, but then they don't have the courage to speak out. So I think, if young people would start to take up these issues instead of issues cooked up for them by the international financial oligarchy, I think we could change the situation very rapidly. I think, if we do not investigate what went wrong in Afghanistan, then there is the danger of a repetition of the same kind of behavior in any other situation. And I also think this idea of going back several hundred centuries, the great game, the role of the British Empire. Many people think the British Empire does no longer exist, but I think that is absolutely not true. So, after all, the radical Islam would not have ever emerged without Zbigniew Brzezinski. The whole question of what happened to the various mutations of radical Islam, which are now in large part the opposition to the Taliban. I think that is not sufficiently emphasized, that the people who are now saying, oh, we have to oppose the Taliban, they are actually proposing to cooperate with the kind of terrorist organizations which are the real threat. So I think there needs to be a lot of discussion, but I think if young people would start to earnestly take up on it, that would make the absolute difference.
Thank you, Helga. I would like to read 3 more questions all together because we don't have much time. We have to go to the next section. We have altogether 15 speakers today. But we have 3 questions which are more or less around the same topic concerning Afghanistan. The first one comes from Martin Glaser in Baltimore, and sounds a bit provocative, but he explains that the purpose of the question is to get support for the demand to release the frozen funds. So he asks, how did the Afghanistan National Bank accumulate the $9 billion in reserves? Was it from internal taxes or other sources of revenue of the former Afghanistan government? Was it from income based upon investments by the central bank? Then we have another question. What steps have been taken to ensure that monetary reserves are released by Europe and the international community? This comes from Dr. Sepgo Gerald Ezekiel from Burkina Faso. And then we have one question from France, from Matthias Mabillot, who asks, is it possible to have more details on the resources and economic perspectives for Afghanistan? So I think, Dr. Merabi, these are questions for you if you wish to answer.
I think the first question, where the reserve came from, they're all the sources that were listed. They are where the reserves have been accumulated. Central bank invests heavily in countries that have high rate of return and safety and security. And I think that has been the country that is Afghanistan has been lucky in attaining high rate of return that has allowed it to be able to generate enough interest on those investments, and that is a part of that. But they're also part, obviously, of our export earning and from our revenue. So those are all points that were raised. Those are correct. Those are sources where we got the revenue from. The second question, what steps were taken to release? I think I mentioned that what I would, I on my own, is started this in the proposal that I cited. If you were listening to that, was this monitored, controlled release of 150 million monthly. I started that, and then I think a month and a half or so later, Taliban formally requested the release from the United States government in their Doha meeting. And that took place as well. And Treasury Department did not respond, and I think they did not respond because at that time they argued that they were examining that. At the top of it, I've met with many congressmen as well as senators and their staff formally over the past month and a half, trying to get them to sign. Well, we have already circulated a petition, and I think I sent the petition to Jerry Bilski, Mr. Bilski. And so we started a petition, one, and then also second, I've written a letter that would like Congress people to sign to President Biden to address this particular issue as well with regard to release of funds. So that's the steps that we have taken overall. Then the third question was something about the prospects, I think, of Afghanistan in the future. The economy is not going to have much of a future unless, as I said, with a GDP decline, it started about 9% for the first month and went down to about 13%. It is projected to go down at 30%. That is a collapse of the economy. So unless these issues that we mentioned, easing flow, preventing access to foreign exchanges, address the expense of ordinary Afghans, as I've said, allowing these aids of 450 billion, $50 million that are at the hands of hands of IMF that has not been released, that Treasury Department is blocking accounts overall, national and block pension list, all of that will have to be released. So in addressing this global terrorism issues, those are all part and parcel of what could make a difference with regard to what will happen to the economy overall. But I see that these limitations are what also are very instrumental in making a difference as to what could happen to the economy. That is, I think, would have to be in one or another, that our efforts trying to explore all the possibilities, how much also can donor operate, even if if United States does not recognize Taliban. As I said, they should be delinked anyhow. But if it doesn't recognize it, how each donor, if the donor wants to go ahead, the European donors and others operate, how can they operate within the existing sanctions? These sanction regimes are crippling, including IMF would not act, World Bank would not act. They do not have a legal obligation to comply with the United States sanctions. World Bank does not, neither does IMF. But why do they do it? It's a question that needs to be put there. And NGOs also obviously do not have the luxury and as well.
Thank you, Dr. Merabi. I think we all agree with you that these measures are insane. I would now close this discussion period by asking all of you for a short summary remarks, and including Helga, if you want to say it now, or I would conclude with Helga, if you agree.
I just want to again make my proposal of the Ibn Sina operation, because while it is important to fight in a certain sense the negative, the release of the funds and all of this should be done, but I still think that you need a positive image of what the operation to save Afghanistan in this particular dangerous moment is all about. And I think the idea of putting up one of the greatest sons of the region, because it's debated if he was born here or there. But I think this would be, a rallying point for many people. And given the pandemic and the health crisis, I still think to put the need to build modern hospitals up front, because if people are dead, then you can't do anything with them anymore. So I still would reiterate this proposal to put the building of a modern health system absolutely in front and give it the name Operation Ibn Sina. So maybe the other people can also say what they think about that.
All right, Paul.
Well, to stay on that, I mean, what Helga said is seems to me brings the point into very sharp relief of really the discussion of the physical economy in the whole panel. We've been discussing Afghanistan and the condition, the physical economic condition that it is in, and given what we know, just imagine how absurd it would be if you have the Secretary of State of the United States very clearly placing a political condition on the end of sanctions and the release of these Afghan reserves. Blinken has said this point blank: we won't do it until the Taliban do what we want them to do. So it is an absolute outrage. It makes, who could possibly imagine that in this situation, in addition, you would say, and also any investment that is made there, any attempt to improve the economy there must be green. It must be in accordance with the taxonomy for the Green New Deal of the European Commission or such things. And yet, because Afghanistan desperately needs hospitals, I think Helga said yesterday, 100 hospitals really operating for 38 million people. I mean, this is an absolutely impossible ratio and situation. It desperately needs more hospitals, at least to be reopened, people hired, in addition also built. And it desperately needs new water sources by the time people are planting in a few months. And it desperately needs more power and the ability to finance that power. So how could you possibly take those development needs and say, well, you can't approach them until you build some wind turbines? And yet, if you look, and they're not doing that now, and yet if you look, just change your view to another developing country, which is also in an economic crisis, nowhere near as bad as that in Afghanistan, but South Africa. South Africa is in a very extreme need of infrastructure investments, and most particularly in power. And yet, South Africa is being compelled by the same kind of conditionalities to obey and those conditionalities imposed by the private banks, by the private sector, by the money managers, that was imposed on them at the Glasgow summit, that in order to get any aid, the president must commit in writing to a rapid shutdown of the coal power production in the country. This is just as outrageous. And my point was simply that this is what the international Green Deal aspect of this hyperinflationary policy, this is what it really consists in. In all of the developing nations across the world, it will be disastrous. But here we have an example in which action must be taken, and the approach of the Operation Ibn Sina that Helga outlined more fully this morning, that really defines exactly what that urgent action should be.
Thank you, Paul. For those of you who have doubts on wind turbines and taxonomies, I invite all of you to watch our panel tomorrow at 10 a.m. East Coast time and 4 a.m. European time, which is entitled "There Are No Limits to Growth." Mr. Merabi, do we go with Ibn Sina?
Yes, I think it's I'm excited about that. Ibn Sina Hospital is right in the heart of Kabul. As a matter of fact, if I would deviate a little bit, my mother, when I was in high school, actually, I took her she died on the road to delivery. So I'm a very strong advocate of building hospitals, but the package definitely will have to focus on hospital is a very integral part of it. Local livelihood, basic income, small infrastructure, all of those would have to be coupled. And definitely, if people are not healthy, and obviously if they don't have nutrition and access to buying basic necessities of life, then that will further create a situation where we have to have more hospitals. To avoid that, obviously, we need to have a complete package that would focus on all services that people need. And definitely the embarkation of this Ibn Sina hospital is a welcome move in that direction.
Thank you. Mr. Terra, I'm sorry I neglected you too much, I think, but all the questions were all specific on Afghanistan. But if you have some remarks on what the other speakers said, what Elga said, and if you want to say more, please.
Certainly. All great points. I do agree with Dr. Merabi in terms of petitioning to unfreeze the $9.5 billion of the central bank. And we're here to support. We're here in Washington, so we'll support that petition very proactively. And likewise, in terms of the hospital that Helga mentioned, the Ibn Sina Hospital, it's a specific, concrete project. And with the advent of technology, telemedicine, something that we are working with, and this could be a tremendous resource and leapfrog capability for the Afghan people. But I do agree that it needs to be part of a broader package of building capacity and infrastructure in Afghanistan. But I really do appreciate what, Helga, you brought up just a minute ago in terms of the courage to really define a new narrative. At the core, why the question was brought up earlier, why is the international community not stepping up? At the core of this problem and at the core of the solution is the human condition. And a new narrative, a paradigm shift must happen right now. All the old modalities are no longer functioning. So we need, as individuals, as the international community, to address this and deeply examine, deeply listen to the root causalities and invent a new paradigm that is on the path to peace. So I think that courage at the heart of it to really turn the page is warranted among the youth, amongst the leading members of societies, and as a world body, we need to really examine this.
Thank you. Helga, you want to have a very short remark to close this round?
Yeah, I would just really appeal to all our viewers and listeners that, in a certain sense, you have to mobilize agape. This human species, and I think why people are not reacting, because they have become what we call depraved indifference. You can portray a picture where you say, 95% of the people in Afghanistan are in danger to die over the winter. That's what Beasley said. If you are human, this should evoke a tremendous passion to help and to make it better. So I would really appeal to you to, forget it, that is a culture you may not know much about it, but I got really fascinated about the history of Afghanistan. It's very difficult because, for example, it's not so much known about Bactrian, but it was an ancient civilization at the time of the Greek ancient great civilization. There are many Greek inputs. Not enough archaeological work has been done. In any case, there is a lot to discover, and I think people have to develop passion for other cultures and other countries. And that does not mean you accept what their values are, nor should you try to proselytize and impose your values on them. I think the fact that the world is so rich, in terms of many expressions of creativity, of the human genius, I think that should motivate us. And a new narrative, if you want to call it that way, should be built on the best traditions of what every nation and every culture has contributed. And that's why I put so much emphasis on Ibn Sina. But that should be, that which links us to a more beautiful future for all of mankind. And, I want you to mobilize Agape to do exactly that.
Thank you, Helga, and thank you to all the speakers. And now we go to the next section of our panel. To all viewers who just connected, I remind that you are watching the second panel of the International Conference of the Schiller Institute. The conference is entitled "All Moral Resources of Humanity Have to Be Called Up. Mankind Must Be the Immortal Species." And our panel is entitled "The Science of the Physical Economy." So now we will talk about Haiti and the global health crisis. And we start with Dennis Small, who is the Ibero-American director of the Executive Intelligence Review. And his topic is a strategy for destroying dope incorporated in the 21st century.
Back in the mid-1970s, almost 50 years ago, Lyndon LaRouche declared war on Dope Inc., the international drug cartel responsible for waging a new opium war on the world's population. He did it in the only way you can win such a war, by identifying and destroying the British banks and financial interests that are the driving force and the main beneficiaries of that drug trade, as we at EIR did in the international bestseller commissioned by Mr. LaRouche, Dope Inc., Britain's Opium War Against the World. Oh, sure, you have to use law enforcement and even military measures in some circumstances. You have to eradicate the crops, destroy the labs, seize the narcotics, help treat and release addicts from their enslavement to drugs, and free equally enslaved peasants and others in the supply chain from their bondage by providing productive alternative crops and agro projects. But above all, you have to track down the multi-trillion-dollar banking and financial apparatus that runs Dope Inc., and then try and jail those responsible, three-piece banker suits and all. This has never happened to date. So let's not hear any more nonsense about how you can't wage a war on drugs, that it's been tried and it failed. There has never been an actual war on drugs, not the kind that Lyndon LaRouche called for, which would start with Glass-Steagall banking separation that has already been discussed by my colleagues on this panel, and would proceed to replace the drug economy with global infrastructure projects such as LaRouche's World Land Bridge. The only so-called strategy that has been tried and failed is that of drug legalization. I'll show you what I mean. Drugs are a pandemic that have swept the planet over the last half-century. Our quantitative analysis of the drug trade has always focused on the actual physical quantities of drugs produced and the dollar value of their potential sale. Here's the big picture. Over the last 40 years, the drug trade has grown from a $250 billion per year business to one that now rakes in over $1.5 trillion per year. In the 21st century, it tripled in value. Please note that over half of that potential revenue comes from marijuana. Please note as well that about 1/4 of the world's 200 million cannabis users are Americans. In short, the driving force for the global market expansion for Dope Inc. is marijuana, the gateway drug par excellence. And the driving force for that expansion has been the legalization of pot in the United States, as we shall see further ahead. Not to minimize the important deadly role played by opiates, opium and heroin, cocaine, and amphetamine-type stimulants, or ATS, including, most significantly, methamphetamines. I want to point out that this graphic is a conservative estimate of the entire drug trade. It does not include new psychoactive substances, or NPSs, which are being cranked out by Dope Inc. chemists more rapidly than the new designer drugs can be scheduled or made illegal. It's estimated that there are over 1,000 such drugs, and new ones are being created at the rate of about 80 per year. Nor does it include CPDs, or controlled prescription drugs, including opioids such as OxyContin and fentanyl, and their synthetic variants, which are the leading cause of skyrocketing overdose deaths in the United States today. I want to emphasize that ever since the US and China reached an agreement and China's class scheduling of fentanyl in May 2019, trafficking of fentanyl from China into the United States has plummeted. In 2017, 128 kilos of China-originated fentanyl were seized. In 2020, that had dropped to a half kilo. So, when NPSs and CPDs are taken into account, it is quite possible that the total blood money take of Dope Inc. is actually in the range of $2 trillion per year. The total value has risen despite the fact that average prices have dropped significantly across all categories of drugs. This is a result of Dope Inc.'s intentional marketing strategy of price reduction in order to expand the number of consumers and therefore total sales. In the next set of graphs, we turn to physical quantities produced of various drug categories. Let's start with cocaine. The coca leaf is grown and processed into cocaine in just 3 countries in the Andes region of the Americas, Peru, Bolivia, and Colombia. It is then shipped to the US through Central America, Mexico, and the Caribbean islands, including Haiti and the Dominican Republic, and to Europe. Again, note the dramatic rise in the quantity of cocaine produced, going from 777 tons of pure cocaine equivalent in 2000 to 1,886 tons in 2019. Colombia has played the dominant role in this increase ever since it stopped aerial eradication of coca plants under international pressure from environmentalist NGOs and the State Department, and is now limited to using machetes. Now let's look at opium production, much of which is trafficked as simple opium and part is converted into heroin. In 2019, Afghanistan produced 6,700 tons of the 8,500 tons produced worldwide, or about 80% of the total. Up until the mid-1990s, Afghanistan grew very little poppy and produced very little opium. The sharp drop you see in 2001 is an important anomaly and occurred during the period that the UNODC, then headed by Pino Arlacchi, worked with interested international parties and with the Taliban to try to stop the doping takeover of that country. Then came the US and NATO occupation, and you can see the results. We turn next to marijuana. This graph shows the street sale value of global marijuana production, as well as the minuscule amount that has been seized, scarcely 6% of the total produced. Total potential sales skyrocketed in the 21st century from a mere $134 billion in 2000 to $823 billion in 2019, a stunning 6-fold increase. But it gets worse. During the same period, the THC content per gram of marijuana, that's the psychoactive compound in cannabis, rose from about 5% in the year 2000 to 15% in 2019. In other words, 6 times more marijuana is being consumed, and it is on average 3 times more potent than what was happening in 2000. And it gets worse still. The next graphic is a little more complicated, and I'm going to ask you to study it closely. The rising red line indicates the rapid growth of the physical quantity of marijuana produced worldwide over the last 40 years. Now add in the blue line, which is the average price on the American streets of a gram of marijuana corrected for an average THC content of 5%. You can see here Dope Inc.'s marketing strategy in action. The price of pot was drastically lowered beginning in the 1990s, with a 4-fold drop as of today. During that same time period, the quantity produced and sold skyrocketed, also by about 4-fold. Finally, map all of this against the timeline of the drive for the legalization of drugs in the United States. First came decriminalization, a campaign led and financed by the likes of mega speculator George Soros. It is the bankers and financiers that have promoted the legalization drive all along. In 1973, Oregon became the first state to decriminalize marijuana, followed by another dozen states over the next 5 years. That set the stage for the sharp drop in price and for widening the net with the introduction of so-called medical marijuana. California was the first state to do that in 1996, and within 2 decades, the majority of U.S. states had adopted the same policy. That's when consumption really took off. Then full legalization of the recreational use of marijuana was unleashed in 2012 by Colorado and Washington state. Today, 18 states have done the same, and fully 40 of the 50 states now have either recreational, medical, or decrim laws on the books. In 1995, 80% of American adolescents understood that there is risk involved in using marijuana. By 2019, under heavy propaganda bombardment by the drug lobby, their purchased congressmen and the media, that had dropped down to 50%. Today, marijuana consumption, Dope Inc.'s most successful gateway drug, is ubiquitous in the United States of America. It should come as no surprise that the prevalence of use in the US population is about 15% and rising, which is 3 times that of Europe and 4 times the world average. To call the overall impact of the drug pandemic deadly is an understatement. 500,000 people died of drug-related deaths in 2019. Over the course of the 21st century to date, close to 10 million human beings have been lost to drugs. Based on that, the UN further calculates something they call healthy life years lost due to drugs. In 2019 alone, that translated into 18 million life years lost. Over the course of the 21st century, we have lost about 600 million potentially productive life years. About 25 of those 600 million belong to my older brother. And I'm quite sure that each of you watching this report have similar losses you could recount. Now let's turn to some answers. It's the economy, stupid. Of all the socioeconomic factors that affect the prevalence of drug consumption, in this case, opioid abuse, it is not if you are Black, white, or Hispanic. It's not whether or not you have a college or high school degree. It's whether or not you have a job. So I said at the outset, if you want to take down Dope Inc., it's critical to replace the world narco economy with a global high-tech infrastructure development plan of the sort Lyndon LaRouche defined. Work with other nations, and China's Belt and Road Initiative in particular, to build the World Land Bridge Network. That will upgrade global productivity and create 1.5 billion new productive jobs across the planet. This will replace what today could be called the World Dope Bridge. We show here a schematic map of the case of the cocaine trade. The Caribbean basin in particular must become a location of US-Chinese cooperation to replace the drug economy with high-tech infrastructure projects, including high-speed rail lines, new industrial ports, and science centers. Today, the economy in the region is dominated by cocaine and other drug trafficking. Which brings me to my final point, Haiti. The policy approach taken so far by the Biden administration will never establish security in Haiti, because the gangs now controlling daily life there thrive on the poverty that is ravaging the entire population, especially the youth. Furthermore, those gangs have been provided heavy weaponry and other backing by Dope Inc. Haiti, like the Dominican Republic, is a major Caribbean transshipment site for cocaine and other drugs heading north to the US from the Andean countries. Nor would an outright US invasion work, as some hotheads in Washington and elsewhere have proposed. The only security policy that can function is one based on the immediate economic development of Haiti and the whole region, as the Schiller Institute has laid out in its plan to develop Haiti. A workable approach would be to deploy a multinational Army Corps of Engineers of friendly nations under United Nations authority that would respect Haiti's sovereignty and would work with its authorities to address both the economic and security problems simultaneously. They would have to immediately guarantee deliveries of oil, food, and other necessities, now held hostage by the gangs, through armed convoys authorized to deploy whatever force is required. This Corps of Engineers would at the same time immediately move for CCC-type projects for youth to start national reconstruction, and that it should involve American, Chinese, Brazilian, and other military engineers. Such an approach would quickly win over the population and isolate the gangs and their controllers once they see that it's serious, that it will work, and that it respects Haitian sovereignty. At the same time, similar international cooperation would be deployed to interdict any and all shipments of drugs in and out of Haiti and the Dominican Republic. That will quickly dry up the source of funding and arming of the gangs. There will then be only one game left in town: development. And such an emergency action program would then serve as a model of the kind of approach needed globally to destroy Dope Inc. in the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis, for your important and also personal presentation. And we go now to Billy Anders Estimé from Haiti. He is the co-founder of Café Diplo Haiti, and he will speak on Make the Schiller Institute Plan to Develop Haiti Known Everywhere.
I am Billy Anders Estimé. I am co-founder of Café Diplo. I would like to thank the Schiller Institute for this opportunity to speak to the whole world through this short video during this international conference. The world is changing, and no one should remain indifferent to this change. Faced with this change, we cannot, and above all, we must not remain indifferent. The most sacred values in all the history of the humanity are for the most part threatened by this change today. Human rights, which constitute the basis of all modern societies, are today in danger, because today human well-being is no longer a duty in certain states. I will take Haiti as an example at this time. So I wonder what we are really talking about when we refer to the concept of globalization. There are even the states most concerned which refuse to be aware of their common destiny. I feel more seeing at such a crucial moment when we must come closer that the Dominican Republic and Haiti are venturing into a diplomatic struggle that can turn sour at any time, given the fragility of the existing relationship between the two countries. I will not ask the political leaders of the two countries to forget history, but the time of historical hatred is over. We must avoid going into the past to arouse hatred because we have a bigger problem today. The future must be the priority. Haiti and the Dominican Republic share an island. We, Haitians and Dominicans, must unite to develop the island, because the problem on one side automatically become problematic for the other side. And the mass immigration of Haitians to the Dominican Republic clearly proves it. The mutual assistance between the two occupiers of the island is a necessity to develop it. The development plan proposed by the Schiller Institute, apart from the fact that it takes into account the inability of Haiti to lead to its own development, also touches a particular point that makes it even better. This is the relationship between Haiti and Dominican Republic. China's involvement is essential to the launch of a reconstruction and development program for Haiti and the surrounding region, which must necessarily include the Dominican Republic, which shares the island of Hispaniola with Haiti, and other nations of the Caribbean and Central American basin. This set of nations will function as part of the global land bridge. This sentence from the plan allows me to say that the plan is not only aimed at the development of Haiti, although Haiti is at the center, seeing the urgent needs, but it includes the development of the island and why not the region. The plan has 8 main axes that come together in a central point, a universal health system. It is a formidable plan, but it is at the same time very complex, and at the same time requires a great fight in order to see the day, because I sincerely do not yet see the will of the different actors involved in this plan. We have a struggle to fight, and we must set aside our differences to fight it together, because no one can do it alone. States today can't go it alone or regroup in small claims, because the problem facing humanity concerns every human being. It is time for a great cooperation to eradicate hunger, poverty, injustice, the vulnerability of nations to climate change. We must prioritize the principle of cohabitation more than ever, because whether we like it or not, we have the planet in common. And to protect it, we must act together. I urge everyone, and especially young people, not only from Haiti or the Dominican Republic, but from all over the world, to fight for a better future with the foundation of a state mutual aid that prioritizes human well-being. Let us act together to allow the plan of the Taylor Institute for Haiti to be known by as many people as possible in order to boost the key players to engage in the resolution of this plan. We are all neighbors, making the planet our center of unity because it is a gift we have in common, and we must preserve and protect everything. We also have a duty to keep it in good shape for future generations, because we are only temporary occupants. To you, my dear Dominican and Haitian brothers, it is time to become aware of our common destiny and to ring the bell of unity and solidarity in order to be able to think about the progress of the Hispaniola, of the island of Hispaniola. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Estimé. And as you said correctly, a plan to develop Haiti is a plan to develop the island in the first place. The other half of the island is the Dominican Republic. This is the island, most people know, this is the island that my compatriot Christopher Columbus landed in 1492, and he thought this was Japan. So therefore, let's go to listen to Domingo Reyes from the Dominican Republic. Mr. Reyes is a former professor of economics, and he has a master's degree in higher education. He will talk on the topic of infrastructure and education, key to developing Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Okay, thank you. Well, the next one is Mr. Eric Walcott. He is the director of the Strategic Partnerships at the Institute of Caribbean Studies in Washington, D.C. And his topic is Haiti and Afghanistan, needed lessons for nation building, not chaos.
Well, Haiti as it currently, the state of Haiti as it currently exists at this time, we are slowly descending into a state of total chaos. It has not gotten the support of the Organization of American States. It has not gotten the support of the United Nations. It has not gotten the support of CARICOM. So therefore, you have a chaos in Haiti taking place where you have petty gangs who are now stifling not only the economy, commerce, you have fuel lines or fuel transport lines that have been somewhat hijacked by petty gangs led by G9. You also have water that has now actually being stopped from getting from point A to point B. Most people who know Haiti, they know that these water trucks go around the country and deliver water so that people can have portable water to drink, to wash clothes and other things. So earlier today, I had conversations with someone very close to the Prime Minister, and the message that was said was, enough with the promises. Enough with the promises. We need help, and we need help right now. We need approximately 300 to 400 US military or international force, whether it be from the United Nations, CARICOM, or elsewhere, to come to Haiti to help to restore law and order in the country. This cannot be done with a small amount of police force in Haiti. It cannot be done. You have police who are facing all types of assault weapons, no type of protective gear whatsoever. So at this point, the message is Haiti has answered the call from the inception of the US War of Independence and so forth. Many friends throughout Latin America and the Caribbean, as far as Colombia, Venezuela, even the Republic, the Dominican Republic. So we cannot continue to have Haiti descend into chaos for whatever reason. And we, who are part of the larger community of member states who respect law and order, the rule of law, to allow Haiti to continue to descend into chaos. Certainly not after a major tragedy with the assassination of the president. The people are terrorized by the assassination of the president, and they're now being further terrorized, if you would, by these gangs who are actually killing individuals every day, kidnapping individuals, and overwhelming the small police force of Haiti. So Haiti needs your help. I hope that individuals around the world will hear this message.
Thank you. And we have now another guest from Haiti. His name is Johnny Esther. He's the founder of Renaissance Haiti. And he's giving us a short message on greetings to the Schiller Institute and distinguished guests.
Greetings to Schiller Institute and distinguished guests. I am Johnny Esther, founder of Renaissance Haiti from the Caribbean nation of Haiti. It is heartwarming to become an associate of the LaRouche movement, whose objective to champion the rights and needs of all people resonate with me personally and with the works of Renaissance Haiti. My concern to rescue and develop Haiti, my homeland, brings me to contact with you. Perhaps our Creator blessed me to have, at an early age, interest and to study the building of Europe's railroads, especially those of Russia. As an adult, I have drawn upon this knowledge in drafting my reconstruction design for a modern Haiti. 80% of my people in Haiti depend on the informal economy, which has collapsed for making a living. They are without healthcare, without clean water, without modern power. The places and faces of millions of people set to perish unnecessarily in Haiti and many other nations from disease, starvation, and neglect may seem strange, very far away, and unreal to many of you. Imagine, what would you do if these were your children, if these were loved ones of yours? The situation is very, very real and entirely unnecessary. I think the reconstruction plans of the Schiller Institute and Renaissance Haiti go hand in hand. I look forward to an opportunity to elaborate more on this in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we move to Dr. Joycelyn Elders. She has been Surgeon General of the United States, I believe, in the first Clinton administration. And she is talking on the urgent need for a world health system. Not to care is unforgivable.
Good afternoon. Greetings to Helga and all of you assembled internationally for this conference of the Schiller Institute on the theme, all moral resources of humanity have to be called up. All moral resources of humanity have to be called up. Last year, as the pandemic was beginning, I was called on by Helga and others to help initiate the committee for the coincidence of opposites to address not simply the COVID crisis, but the broader crisis of the lack of a full modern healthcare system, accessible to everyone in the US and everyone worldwide. I and others in the committee have emphasized that food, clean and safe water, electricity, decent housing, sanitation, roads, and other infrastructure are as much a part of good health care as hospitals, medical personnel, and medicine. Without measures to ensure all of these parameters, it would be difficult to stop this virus and impossible to stop future variants or new and potentially even more deadly pandemics. We have passed the grim milestone of over 5 million deaths worldwide from COVID. This figure is undoubtedly higher since many deaths in parts of the world may not have been reported. New cases of COVID are now skyrocketing in parts of Europe. The US is far from out of the woods, with a recent average of 70,000 new cases daily and over 1,000 deaths per day. At the same time, we're still seeing hospitals around the country closed or reduced. This is frequently happening in already underserved communities, thereby increasing rather than lessening healthcare disparities, especially in poor and minority communities. We have a critical shortage of nurses and other medical personnel. These matters can no longer be pushed aside. We need a full-scale commitment to expand training, especially of young people in medical and related fields. I've long advocated the training and utilization of youth as our community health workers to aid in the immediate public health tasks, as well as stepping stones to more advanced instruction. This model has been implemented with good results by Dr. Walter Faggett and others in Washington, D.C. At the same time, we must not lose sight of the world situation. The horrific humanitarian crisis today, especially in countries like Afghanistan and Haiti, cry out for our intervention. Recently, my colleague and successor as U.S. Surgeon General, Dr. David Satcher, and I responded to Helga LaRoche's statements regarding the needed approach to the dire health and humanitarian crisis facing Afghanistan, Haiti, and many other nations around the world. I stated, when we speak about the need for basic necessities for life, such as healthcare, food, water, that is the same for people everywhere, regardless of where you are or what type of government you have. The COVID pandemic is exacerbating the crisis in previously former food and health deprived countries. It is clear that the only way this will be defeated is with a modern healthcare system in every nation. The Committee for the Coincidence of Opposites have emphasized the need for comprehensive, not piecemeal solutions. Now is the time for us to end confrontation and engage in cooperation to address the basic needs of humanity. I would like to conclude with just a few words on the progress of the Committee for the Coincidence of Opposites. Over the past 16 months, committee members and collaborators have grown internationally to include physicians, farm leaders, scholars, engineers, religious and civil rights leaders, retired military experts, and concerned people in all fields in many countries. Many are participating in the public dialogue, such as this conference today, and informally in private discussions or initiatives. I already mentioned the Washington, D.C. initiative, which can serve as a model for youth involvement in public health measures around the world. The committee has also been involved in an initiative to provide assistance to the sick and famine-stricken populations of Mozambique. This initiative has been spearheaded by Dr. Kinja Lang, who serves as the chair of the International Affairs Committee of the National Medical Association, NMA, and the Golden State Medical Association, California branch of the NMA. The NMA is the largest and oldest membership association of Black physicians in the United States. This initiative was motivated by the glaring lack of anti-pandemic action and the failure to address the famine crisis in Africa and other points of need by economically capable major nations. This coming week, the committee will be sending a shipment of medicine, medical supplies, water purification tablets, and high protein biscuits to Mozambique. We're also working directly with the World Food Program Office in Mozambique to purchase and distribute food in northern Mozambique. While these are modest efforts, I think this demonstration demonstrates how we can approach this crisis and aspire large-scale government action and changes in policies which are urgently needed. Moral indifference to the plight of our fellow human beings must be overcome. If we all work together, I'm sure we can do it. There's an old Igbo saying, not to know is bad, not to want to know is worse, not to hope is unthinkable, but not to care is unforgivable. We must care. I'm sure we can do it. We must get the job done. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Elders, also for introducing the Committee for the Coincidence of Opposites. Many of the several of the next speakers are also members of this committee. Now let me go back to Mr. Domingo Reyes, whom I announced before, and now we can play his presentation. Mr. Reyes from the Dominican Republic is the former professor of economics, and he has a master's degree in higher education. He speaks on infrastructure and education, key to developing Haiti and the Dominican Republic.
Saludos a todos los hermanos del movimiento larouchista que están presentes en esta conferencia.
Greetings to all the brothers of the LaRouche movement who are present at this conference, and greetings to everyone who will be watching the archived version. The problem of the Dominican Republic and Haiti calls for the solution of a series of problems that are inherent to all the economies of the Third World. We believe that the fundamental thing for solving the problems that exist between nations is the development of the physical infrastructure of the different nations as called for by the LaRouche philosophy of the development of the physical economy. We have to develop a program that strengthens national infrastructure and creates an educational revolution that rescues youth from the streets and takes them to learning centers where they become individuals capable of continuing the development process.
Hay que abandonar los paradigmas neoliberales fracasados.
Discredited neoliberal paradigms which destroy the nation's physical infrastructure and make it dependent on the financial markets that run Wall Street and the City of London must be abandoned. But what happens? National production, both in the Dominican Republic and in Haiti, has been destroyed by the intervention of these models of privatizations and these financial models, which have only increased our foreign dependence and which have, for example, in the case of the Dominican Republic, led to a situation where the weight, the burden of the debt in the national budget is around 25%. This makes it impossible to develop national production and development programs. This also makes it impossible for the economy to absorb the workforce that is coming out of the educational centers. And these people are forced, necessarily, to emigrate abroad, as our Haitian brothers do, who do not have a sufficiently developed educational system, who do not have a well-developed health system, nor do they have physical infrastructure that would allow them to meet their vital needs. And so they emigrate, at first to the Dominican Republic, but they are also going to the entire Caribbean area and to the continental mainland. That is why we recently saw how on the Texas border our Haitian brothers were lassoed by American cowboys, American policemen, just like the days of slavery. All this can be solved in one way, and one way only.
Poniendo en práctica la filosofía del movimiento larouchista, del desarrollo.
And that is by implementing the LaRouche movement's philosophy of the development of the physical economy and of the implementation of those ideas on a national level. As long as we persist in the application of models based purely on financialization of foreign stock markets, which have placed us in a situation of dependency, where everything that is produced, where everything that is made, we either import or the money that we use is borrowed from the international financial system, which increases the burden of the debt more and more, and national production is increasingly insufficient to cover that debt.
Llegará un momento en que
there will come a time when a situation will arise like at the beginning of last century, when in 1916 The custom house and everything that produced money here in the Dominican Republic, as in Haiti, were occupied by foreign controllers who controlled the national income. And they gave back to the state only what was essential for the payment of a few public services. Therefore, until we break with that situation and establish a model based on the development of the physical economy that enhances the national capacities that we have, as well as the production of goods based on our own resources, the economy will be unsustainable.
Thank you, Mr. Reyes. Just one small correction. When he was talking about 25% debt on the budget, he meant deficit. So it's 25% deficit on GDP, which is quite high. On the foreign powers controlling national budget, unfortunately, nations of Europe are going in that direction. We are quite close to that. Let me go to the next speaker, who is Major General Carol Childers, who is a former commanding general of the only light division in the National Guard Reserve components. And his topic is the potential of US Reserve Army units to aid in economic reconstruction in the US and around the world. And he's responded to a specific request by Mrs. Gallagher to explain how the Army capabilities can help in building up a global health system.
I am Carol Childers. I joined the National Guard at 17 during the first few days of high school in Arkansas. And upon graduation from engineering school at Louisiana Tech in '62, I accepted a job at what was then the Naval Weapons Laboratory at Dahlgren, Virginia. It's since been renamed 2 or 3 times. And I also transferred to the Virginia Army National Guard and got commissioned in the state OCS program in 1964. I retired after 44 years of total service in the Guard, commanded at every level from 03, that's a company command, to 08, which is a division command, finally serving as the commanding general of the only light division in the reserve components, which happened to be in the National Guard and was the 29th Infantry Division. I've been asked to speak about the National Guard this morning in relation to how the Guard might fit into a program that can make some tremendous improvements in the world. Humanitarian improvements, a better way of life, and what does the National Guard, what could the National Guard bring to that issue to attempt to make things better? Well, there's a great number of people in the National Guard. If you take the Army and the Air National Guard together, you're approaching 500,000 people. And then in addition to these people who are signed up for and serve in the Guard, typically 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks annual training per year. There are other Guard-related people who are also quite capable in terms of their life's experiences and their willingness to do good in the world. And that would be the retirees. There are many retirees that are only barely 50 years old. There's a lot of retirees like myself who is 83 years old, but there's an awful lot of them that are still in their 50s and still like to do productive things. So there's the Title 10 and the Title 32 Guards people, 500,000 or so people. And then there's the retirees. And then there's a group called the State Defense Force. About half of the states have an organized state defense force. And the State Defense Force are all volunteers. Many of them have served in some service before, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Coast Guard. Many of them have never served anywhere, and the reason they joined the State Defense Force is because they have a desire to serve. I don't know whether or not there would be anybody in the decision-making chain who would be willing to obligate the National Guard and the National Guard and the State Defense Force and the retirees and the militia towards this effort. Because even though you've got all of this, well, in many cases, it could be free labor. But there's cost to anything, even if they would do it for no pay. You still got the cost of maintaining the organization and paying the light bills, and somebody has to be in charge, and there has to be a few people employed full time, a few do the organizational things. But I think it's worth exploring what needs to be done to engage these groups of people that I've outlined. Thank you.
Thank you, General Childers. And the General will be available at a discussion period, which will start after the next two speakers to answer your questions. So the next speaker is Dr. Walter Faget, who is an American and he's a former chief medical officer in the Washington, D.C. Department of Health. He's a co-chair of the D.C. Ward and Health Council, and he will speak on the topic of community healthcare workers in D.C., now a model for the world.
I'm here just leaving Howard University College of Medicine, and you know, it's really exciting that the vision from Dr. Ellis and Helga is now has become a reality. The impact of the community health workers has really mushroomed from Ward 7 and 8 to becoming citywide, where we had the lowest vaccination rate as well as the highest death rate in Ward 8, that has now leveled out. And the immunization rate is over 30% in Ward 7 and 8 at this point. The mayor has incorporated the community health worker concept and really built on the vision from Dr. Elders, so that now it's been pretty well institutionalized. We have both community mental health workers as well as community health workers. And in fact, there is a research center coalition, Research Centers and Minority Institution Coalition, which meets at Howard University. And what they've done now is establish a training program for community health workers. And they've built in the capacity to evaluate the impact, not only on immunization, but other conditions as well. And with the recent concern about childhood immunizations, this will be incorporated as one of the duties of the community health workers here in Washington, D.C. And there's been really a very productive involvement of both high school students, college students, medical students, and that kind of coalition has really been very, very productive. So we are really available to share this project as needed. And I think we have really seen a real change in, well, really a decrease in vaccine hesitancy with the involvement. And now with the childhood immunizations, we're finding that families are now getting better immunized with the onset of immunization of children, which has begun this week here in Washington, D.C. So overall, again, our death rate here in D.C. has been 0 to 1 per day. Unfortunately, there is an issue of all the deaths appear to be among the minority patients. 90% of the deaths do still happen among the males, among African Americans. And we are seeing an increase of 2-to-1 ratio of deaths of male versus female. Again, we are concerned about, we're facing the closure of one of the hospitals in Southeast in the near future, and hopefully having community health workers involved will decrease the impact of that. But I think DC is anticipating the problem here similar to those around the country. Understand Mount Vernon, New York, and other places also are experiencing hospital closures. And we look forward to working with Helga, Dr. Elders, and Dr. Satcher in terms of talking about approaches to decrease the adverse impact on our populations around the country. So again, it's a real pleasure to be with you, and I look forward to the Q&A session so we can expand more. I'm sure there'll be questions on some of the points that we've brought to you. But thanks again for including us.
Thank you, Dr. Faget. And of course, I misspelled the fact that you are co-chairman of the DC Ward 8. And this is now correct. And the next speaker is Dr. Ernest Johnson. He is also from the United States, and he is President Emeritus of the Louisiana NAACP. He's an attorney. He's a professor of law at the Southern University Law Center in Baton Rouge. And the topic is, healthcare is a basic human right, not a privilege.
My name is Attorney Ernest Johnson, and I'm located in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I have been a practicing attorney in the state of Louisiana since 1976. And I'm also a visiting professor of law, teaching voting rights litigation at the Southern University Law Center in Baton Rouge. I have served as in the past, served as the president of the Louisiana NAACP for 22 years, having been elected in 1995 behind Ms. Rupert Richardson, who preceded me as president. And I also, since 2007, did serve on the board of directors of the National NAACP and term limit off the board in February of 2019. So it's been a joy and a pleasure working to help people to help themselves. And I've always admired this organization because it basically stands, as far as I'm concerned, on the same principles. We must all learn to live together as brothers, or we will all perish together as fools. Now, I'm not from New York. I'm from Louisiana. I come from what some people used to call Huey Long country. More recently, people think about it as Katrina country. But what it really is, it's like Mississippi and Alabama, the front line of America in the war on poverty that we keep losing for lack of interest. I believe that the lack of interest is actually because you have to think about world poverty first, like Dr. King tried to say, in order to get at the true mindset that keeps poverty in place in America, look at the increasing resources for war in blood and treasure that we are always told we have to provide, instead of providing those same resources for peace. The Berlin Wall goes down. The Soviet Union disappears. Afghanistan is invaded. Iraq is invaded. And the war budget goes up. Do you realize that we are so uninterested in solving this problem that we are willing at this point to say that we believe that it is easier to change the climate of the whole planet rather than change the climate of indifference? The climate of indifference that has maintained poverty throughout the world. Just last week, people were saying in Glasgow, Scotland, that there should be over $100 trillion to solve a problem that may not exist, and not even 10 trillion to solve a problem that we know how to solve. Why are we saying that? It is a problem that China has brought 800 million people in their own nation out of poverty, and is now saying that it wants to work with other countries to do the same thing around the world. The United States could do the same thing. We could bring the 100 million people in this country out of poverty, but it only makes sense at this time in which this recent pandemic has reminded us that the world is, that we are, as Dr. King said, a geographic one to address the problem of poverty throughout the world as a whole. I say that this is not really a question of money. I say that this is a question of will, but it is also a question of life and death for tens of millions of people around the planet. And as we have already seen in the United States, we may have 1 million less people in the country due to the conditions of poverty in which the pandemic grew. The disproportionate number of poor people that died of the cofactor known as poverty. If I could recommend the continuation of conferences such as this, meetings, one-on-one and multilateral meetings, countries binding up their resources to fight this evilness of poverty. I just want to thank you very much for inviting me. I've enjoyed this conference, and call on me whenever you need.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson, for having addressed the fight against poverty, an issue which the West has seemingly totally forgotten. And now we move to a discussion. I ask the speakers to come together, and before we start our discussion, I want to read the short message that came from Carlos Gallardo, who is the president of the Christian Democratic Party of Peru. It's a short message which I just read to you. The Christian Democratic Party of Peru salutes the enormous effort of the Schiller Institute and its president Helga LaRouche in courageously publicizing the reality of the danger of humanity being subjected to a new world order whose principal thrust is a new form of imperialism, no longer one of one state against others, but of the large multi-trillion-dollar corporations, controllers of science and technology, including space technology over the whole world. Peace, we believe, should be based not on terror and fear of the strongest, nor on the threat of death, but rather should be understood as a community belonging to a civilization which understands that only by recognizing the human being as the prince of creation, endowed with spiritual qualities and human dignity, will humanity be able to establish pathways to opportunities for solidarity, progress, and universal common good. A fraternal embrace, Carlos Gallardo. So, I've seen
my
the
name
speakers coming.
is Attorney Ernest Johnson, and I'm located in Baton.
Who was speaking? Please give me back the panel with the speakers. Oh, we have some technical problems. Oh, here they are again. Oh, hi, Dennis Pitt has joined us. Dennis Pitt is my colleague who moderated the first panel this morning. Everybody knows him, he doesn't need presentations. I don't see Dr. Elders, and that's not good because I have a question for her.
Well, actually, she's with us, but she's not going to be, you're not going to see a video. She's only on by phone.
Okay, so I can read the question, Dennis.
Yeah, I can.
The question,
go ahead.
Yes, the question comes from Dr. Zebgo Gerald Ezekiel. I hope I pronounced this correctly because he comes from Burkina Faso. He is a specialist radiologist. And she asks, I would like to know if, to Dr. Elders, I would like to know if their experience of health aid in Mozambique can be done in other countries like West Africa. Thank you.
Well, let me do the following. Actually, Walter, don't you have a message from Dr. Lang concerning the Mozambique matter? Hold on, I think you're muted.
Hi, yeah, this is Walter here in DC. And I just want to confirm, as Dr. Elders mentioned before, that the Committee for Coincidence Opposites is indeed sending supplies to Mozambique, medicines, medical supplies, water purification, as she already mentioned, as well as a cash donation to the World Food Program in Maputo, Mozambique. And this money will be used to purchase and distribute needed supplies to the Cabo Delgado area, where there are nearly 1 million displaced and food insecure, starving people. Now, this project was urged and spearheaded by committee member Dr. Khadija Lang, who is not available today, but she chairs the Council on International Affairs of the NMA, as Dr. Elders previously mentioned. She's also president of the Global Medical Association, and she has led several medical missions to Mozambique previously. And this was designed to both provide care as well as to train some of the physicians there in Mozambique. So it's an ongoing relationship, which will include bringing medical students to work with potentially young folks interested in health careers. But scores of individuals from several nations have contributed to this combined effort. And hopefully we think that this modest effort to aid Mozambique can serve as a model of cooperation to accomplish the much needed solutions to the health and famine crises we're discussing here at the conference today. But again, I look forward to questions during the Q&A period. Thank you.
Yeah, what we can do now, Claudio, I just want to check and make sure that Dr. Elders can hear us. But what does just referred to? Hear. You can hear us. Very good. So were you able to hear the question that was posed to you before?
Well, I wasn't quite sure. Why don't you repeat it for me? I heard part of it, I thought.
Okay, let me repeat it also because let me repeat it, Dr. Elders, welcome. Also because I have another question, so I will pose both questions to you. The first question is, I would like to know if your experience of health aid in Mozambique can be done in other countries like West Africa. And the gentleman who asks this is a radiologist specialist in Burkina Faso. His name is Dr. Zebko Gerald Ezekiel. Then we have another question from Isa Martinez. And she asks, she says, thank you for the presentation. Dr. Elders highlighted the disturbing mindset that many Americans maintain, in that they would rather not know about the tragic circumstances those in developing countries face every day to survive. I believe many of these people veer away from the truth, not only because the solution seems insurmountable at times, but because once the issues are within plain sight, we are all called to act. That being said, I was hoping Dr. Elders could update us as to how India is combating the ongoing COVID crisis. So, Dr. Elders.
Yes. I think I've been asked several questions, and I'm not sure I know the answers to most of them. But I feel that the group in Mozambique organized a real effort to address the specific problems that they felt was being faced by people in Mozambique. And I think it's an issue that if you take on a problem and feel that you want to solve it, it doesn't matter where it is. You can go anywhere and work on trying to address that major problem. I think people all over the world feel that healthcare should be a human right. And of course, before we really can deal with healthcare, as I've said multiple times, that we've got to start with the basics. You can't have good healthcare. You can't keep ignorant people healthy. So you have to educate them. But before you do that, you've got to make sure you have food, try to have clean water, clothing, and shelter. I think those are basic needs that people all over the world need, regardless of where you are. You never, as a human being, you never escape those very basic needs in addressing a problem. Well, I'm well aware that we have a major problem in India, and I feel that we need to be doing everything we can to try and make sure we get immunizations and things to India. We need to all over the world. People need to be made aware of doing the things that they can do. And we need to all get busy of doing what we can do. We all don't need to do everything, but we can all do something. And I think if every country, if every individual, all of our youth take on the basic problem of doing something to make a difference with people all over the world, I think it's a mindset. We've got to change our basic mindset to try and get done the things which we can do. Nobody can do everything, but we can all do something.
Was a question, Dr. Elders. Did you hear the presentation that was done by Major General Carol Childers concerning the possibilities of the use of different portions of national defense forces?
I did hear parts of it in and out. And
Right.
I do feel that we can begin to use our national defense forces all over. As I said, I understand that somebody's got to be in charge. Somebody's got to direct them. Somebody's got to tell them what to do. But we need to, and that requires organization. I don't care what we do. We've got to get organized in order to get something done. And somebody has to be in charge. Somebody has to be responsible. And I think that that's a big thing that we need to start thinking of, start trying doing. We all don't need to run out there calling ourselves going to do everything. We can also, we're going to provide clean water to everybody. Well, we might provide clean water, but if we provide clean water and no food, they're still going to die. So I'm saying we've got to organize to make sure we provide both clean water, food, adequate health care, immunizations, whatever is needed. We've got to organize, find out what's needed, and there needs to be, regardless of what's done in the world today, we have to organize, develop, and get the organization on ground to get it done. And I think now we have enough telemedicine, enough different things to be able to do many of the things that need to be done. But we have to organize them, what's to be done, where it's to be done, and decide who's going to do it.
Okay, I'd just like to do one thing here, which is to get any response that Major General Childers may have, both to what Dr. Elders has just said and also to whatever else you've heard. Since you made a proposal, which I just wanted to make sure we had some discussion. We have a limited period of time for the whole discussion. So if there's anything you'd like to say at this point. Major Childers. I think you're muted.
How about now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I certainly agree with what she just said. Somebody has to make a decision. And then the hard part comes is locating the fiscal resources to carry something like this off. I basically outlined the amount of talent that is found within the reserve components and all of its sub-elements. And when I say sub-elements, I mean there's Air National Guard, there's Army National Guard, there's militia, there's state defense forces. You can actually divide the National Guard units up into Title 10 people, U.S. Code, and Title 32 people. And there's also a host of civilians employed by the National Guard, full-time employment by the National Guard. I have not discussed this with the National Guard Bureau, nor the DOD, nor any of the other large decision makers. I discussed it because I was asked to give my views on this general subject, and I've done that.
Just wanted to, that's probably going to conclude what time we have on that proposal because we only have a limited amount of time on the questions. Thank you very much for saying that. Claudia, I'm turning it back over to you because there's plenty on Haiti. You've got Richie, you've got several people who obviously you may want to address things to. And Dr. Elders, we want to thank you for being with us. If you can stay any longer, that'd be good, but at least we've got that established on the record. And I'm sure Helga's going to take that under advisement.
Well, thank you very much. And as I said, I'm sitting in my car in a parking lot at the football game, and I'm sure I'm not very clear, and I don't have my notes with me, so I don't know that I have much else to contribute.
That's right. You were clear enough, including about the football game. So we want to thank you for being with us and making that contribution. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, goodbye.
Okay.
All right.
So I saw we have with us also Richard Freeman, who is co-author of the development plan for Haiti and the Caribbean for the Schiller Institute. And we have actually a question on development from Maria Eugenia. And she says, how can the countries of the Caribbean basin which have diplomatic relations with China, such as the Dominican Republic, Costa Rica, Panama, and El Salvador, how can they cooperate so that Haiti can execute its development plans by sharing the same gang problems and underdevelopment as Haiti to develop would help its neighbors to develop? Yes, helping Haiti to develop would mean helping other countries to develop. So, who wants to answer?
Yes, I can. Johnny Esther, do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Yes. So in Renaissance Haiti, we focus on American diplomacy, U.S. diplomacy to Haiti, about Haiti. So we are focused now to try to put people who got an empathy for Haiti, like Daniel Lewis Food, like Gregory Mix, like Andy Levin, to reward those people and to put them on the light. The reason why we want to have all Americans who don't like this policy, this diplomacy, the American government apply against Haiti to change. We want it to change, and we know this policy is not all Americans who accept it, who like it. There are a lot of Americans who don't like it. So a lot of them stay and they don't say anything. They don't allow their voice to say to change it. So if we can have more people who coming to the people like Daniel Lewis Foote, who quit his position in Haiti because he didn't accept the way the American government and sent back the Haitian who coming from Mexico to Del Rio. Some people like Gregory Mix or Andy Levins who a lot of time they asking for a transition for Haiti. So the U.S. government, even the Biden administration, who during his campaign for this position, he went to Miami, Florida, to promise to the Asian community to help them to have a change in Haiti. And after he got the power, he did nothing for this change. So now we have to bring together all people who got an empathy for Haiti, who not agree with this policy, to avoid their voice and to push the pressure on this government and the way they could change this approach. So we can always have help. We need help. We need other organizations like Schiller Institute, like Miss Helga Lausch, to help us to make more heavy voice to talk about the situation, because we have a plan. This plan, if we apply it, the Renaissance plan, we can make a miracle in Haiti in 10 years. In 10 years, we can really change a lot of things in Haiti. And our plan is focused on rebuild Haiti by the infrastructure. We think about railroads. We think about to create new cities around the train station. You know, we talk about to move the population who living in the high or big area like Port-au-Prince, Cap-Haïtien, to the new city, and we can rebuild the cities the way they used to living in the slum area. So we have a good plan. So we need to have a policy support, international support policy, to be able to apply this plan for Haiti. And with this plan, who focus on physical economy, like Laos movement or Schiller Institute put is going to be a good thing for Schiller Institute or the Laos movement, if they can support this approach, this way we would like to rebuild Haiti. So we need help. We need a lot of organization to help us to do that. So is the reason why I am coming to Schiller Institute to have help to change this situation in Haiti.
Thank you, Mr. Estor. I would like to have, from Richard Freeman and Mr. Walcott, I would like to have your thoughts about it. And first, Richard, and then Mr. Walcott.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Unmute yourself. Yes, I can hear you.
You can? Okay, because I'm not muted. Okay. So I just want to say this was an excellent panel, and many of the presentations were really exceptional. We've had the privilege, Clarette Carl and I, to speak with Mr. Estor a couple of times on this type of thinking. I just wanted to mention, this is a very poor copy, but I didn't have a lot of advance time. But this is the October 1st issue of the EIR, and it's our issue on our Haiti plan, the Schiller Institute plan for development of Haiti. And I would just say that people should go to the LaRouche Pub EIR, and they can look at the whole plan. You just can download it very easily. Just a couple of points. As people may know, we've discussed this. Haiti is locked into a couple of situations, one of which is that it gets 75% of all its energy from charcoal, which comes from burning trees, which is a 16th century technology. Haiti must be freed from that. And what we propose in the plan, I'm not going to go through the whole plan, far from it, but we propose that we build about 27 megawatts of installed power over the next 20 years, but especially the next 15 years, but especially 13.5 megawatts. And they would be spread out in every part of the country because the children wake up, there's no power, there's not food, there's not the development that they can have to bring out the genius of the Haitian people. We also propose, and I just want to mention this in terms of the health system, because this gets to what Helga was talking about, what Dr. Forget we're getting at. Haiti has 1% of its population vaccinated against COVID. It also has only about very, very few nurses who are in Haiti. There are some others, but if you get sick in Haiti, you need nurses in Haiti. They're completely capable of developing that. And what we propose is to that Haiti, and we have it in the plan, 100,000 nurses. That's absolutely essential. We get from 2,800 doctors to 20,000 doctors to build 184 new hospitals, and that these hospitals would have 47,000 new beds. What that gets at, what Helga said immediately about back in May, if you do that, then you need clean water and you need electricity, vast amounts of those. One thing I just like to do is, if Dave DeBroat is there, if he could bring up 2 images on this to give just a sense, because it has to be a comprehensive plan that the U.S., China, and especially Haiti will be participating in, but also the entire region. So, David, are you able to call up 2 of the charts?
Yes.
Okay. The first one is the Haitian plan, which is the very last one in the set. Yes. Now, this is something we developed. It will have, that's, if you look at the railroad, when that's a railroad on the coast from Fort Liberté all the way to Jacmel in the south, that's an 1,100 mile or 1,600 kilometer railroad. It would development corridors, which is exactly what Johnny is talking about. New cities, high technology, fiber optics, the electricity, and so forth. In every part of Haiti, we would also have, and you can see the little symbols, both the power plant and the water treatment plant, 230,000 gallons per day. You need clean water. The power would come from floating nuclear power plants, clean coal and natural gas. And then you will see from Jacmel through Port-au-Prince up to Fort Liberté, that would be a high-speed rail development corridor. Development because all of these corridors would develop not just rail transport, but the entire nation. Cities developing, factories developing, and so forth. Now that would travel at about 180 to 210 miles per hour, about 350 kilometers per hour. And then the other one is the one that shows the region as a whole, because this gets at the point that every speaker has referenced, particularly some of the speakers, Billy Estimé and so forth. It's the one that will show the regional development plan, if it's possible to find it. Yes. Now, what we're thinking of is, and you'll see Haiti right next to the Dominican Republic. We will develop Fort Liberté, which is in the north, into the deepest port in the entire region, including the United States, that can handle huge amounts of these, what are called TEUs, 20-ton equivalent terminals. But if you look at from Ponce in Puerto Rico, you look all the way over to Guatemala, El Salvador, and so forth, and then places like Guyana and so forth. That's a population of 92 million. This will become part of the Maritime Silk Road. And then we will connect that whole development area with Ibero-America and elsewhere, including the rail that could begin in the very south of South America, Ibero-America, at Tierra del Fuego, and will go all the way up through the Darien Gap, through Mexico, through the United States, and into Canada. This will require Haiti to recognize China. It's not a minor question at all, because China will not allow have a country simply recognize one of its provinces, which is what Taiwan is. It's an easy step to do for them. And then they have many plans, which are very powerful. This is all encompassed in this our program, so I recommend people go to it. But the idea is, if we unleash this in Haiti, within 10 to 15 years, Haiti will develop every one of the critical capacities, from machine tool capacity, steel capacity, and so forth. and Haiti will become one of the most developed countries within a generation in the entire world, demonstrating that if you take the genius of the Haitian people and this method of LaRouche, you can then transform that, bring the United States and China working together, which is what we need rather than going to war, and then start to develop every country in the world as a matter of principle.
Thank you, Richard. Mr. Walcott, you want to have a short remark? After that, then we will round up this discussion.
Muted.
You're muted. We can't hear you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dennis and others, and the Schiller Institute for affording us this opportunity to have such an important discussion, particularly on a country that is near and dear to me, and based on recent surveys, particularly after the 2010 earthquake. You saw that more than 58%, it was 70% of Americans said that they were following very closely what was taking place. And then you had another 18% of households that were polled mentioned that they had actually made a donation to earthquake relief, with another 30% saying that they would be making some in the near future. So Haiti has occupied a very important place in the hearts and minds of the United States, and I should just say the West, and rightfully so, as the first Black republic. But currently, the issues that Haiti is facing really requires our most clear-minded approach. I believe that the problem that we do have with gangs, with instability in Haiti, is because there's a lack of actually commerce, lack of an environment where individual can gain any type of life, any type of business, so that they can take care of their families. And of course, what you saw with regard to the recent killing of President Jovenel was a play out of the whole socio-economic barons, if you would, that continue to have a real stranglehold, not only on the economy, but all matter of social life in the Republic of Haiti. What does Haiti need right now? I think it needs, for us to come together as a global community and really work with the people of Haiti so that we can, for once, we can have the genius of the Haitian people come to light. I will not go into further details. I think the clear plan that has been mentioned by the previous speaker and others really spells out a plan to really take Haiti into the future. So with that, I'm just going to say that at this point, the people of Haiti are in crisis. As you know, fuel lines have been impacted, water, and to a certain extent, individuals cannot even go to school, cannot go to church, or cannot even go to the marketplace and do light shopping. So I really call on all support for by the West, particularly the United States country, where I now call home. I really would like to see us get more engaged in working with the current administration so that we could stabilize the country, rid the country of gangs, and prepare it for next elections. I am not as optimistic as others, though, to think that just having an event of an election will mean that you will have stability, you'll have peace, you'll have security. It needs for our continued support to work with Haiti, to rid it of gangs, to help build its institutions of governance, as have been mentioned, and to actually bring it into the 21st century. So with that, I just want to thank the Schiller Institute and others who have been very thoughtful and continue to focus on this issue so that we all could work together to see how we could support the Haitian people in moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walcott. And I would ask now Dennis Speed for concluding remarks for this section before we go to the next. If you thought we would be over now, you're wrong. we have 100 more speakers. Now we have a section on agriculture, which is very interesting. So
I've got a little bit of feedback for you, if you don't mind.
You can go quickly, Eric, Walter, rather.
The presentation concerning developing Haiti, I could notice all of the power plants. If you will give me a call, I'll tell you all about a kind of a power plant that you might not be aware of.
Okay, thank you very much. So we just want to make sure that people are clear that the last presentations were all the product of what Helga had described as her Committee for the Coincidence of Opposites. And that process has now succeeded in carrying out a project in Mozambique and a project in Washington, D.C. And we are looking to try to expand that project, both of those projects, in various ways, including in the United States. The actual image that we have really comes from the work of Alexander Hamilton and the founders of the United States, the actual founders, the people that collaborated with Toussaint Louverture, who brought Toussaint, or rather the delegation from Haiti, into the White House in the John Adams administration, the people that understood the difference between Jacobinism and true republicanism, and the people who, in the form of Franklin Roosevelt, for example, understood the great injustice that had been done there. We talked about injustices in Afghanistan earlier today, and wanted to solve these problems. And so we're asking and urging that people join that committee, the Committee for the Coincidence of Opposites. There's various ways to do that, and also join the Schiller Institute, and we'll put up a banner so that you can go to our site, and that'll give you instruction as to how you can become members. But we just wanted to indicate that the committee has been not only successful, but will be continuing other work. There was a particular question concerning West Africa, and yes, there is something that could be done there as well as in other locations. But the main idea is that the entire theme of today's presentations has been this idea that we are an immortal species, and if we act from the standpoint of our species nature, we don't leave anyone in the world in a condition of destitution or desperation. And so we want to thank particularly the persons from the Committee for the Coincidence of Opposites that participated in this past section. Now back to you, Claudio.
Thank you, Dennis. So let's move to the really concluding section, which will be, now we will have a couple of representatives from the agricultural sector. We're gonna listen to Alf Schmidt from Germany, who is an independent farmer, and he's a leader of farmers' demonstrations in Berlin. So can we go with this presentation, please?
Hello, I greet you. My name is Alf Schmidt. I'm 56 years old, and I run a sheep farm. I am a pasture sheep farmer. We manage 100% nature reserves with our animals. But we'll get to that later. Well, I've been thinking about this, and I have a question. Just over 100 years ago, there were 1.6 billion people on this planet. That's now the number living in India or China alone, because we are now almost 8 billion people. That means an annual increase of about 70 million people. 70 million people who want to eat and drink. And what is happening in the world? 480 million are hungry. 3 to 4 million die of hunger every year. And Europe and Germany are decadent to the hilt. A policy is being pursued that is beyond imagination. And I think there's one thing we haven't experienced in Germany, that's hunger. At least not in the last 50 years. And I sometimes have the feeling that this is what the Germans or the Europeans are lacking. Starvation, a week of hunger, a little bit of fasting to see or maybe to get to know that food doesn't grow at Aldi, Edeka, Kaufland, and the like, but has to be produced by the hard labor of farmers. When I then see that in the next 10 years another billion people will be added, when I see how many from Africa and elsewhere are fleeing poverty, fleeing hunger, fleeing wars, and when I see then our policy, then I just get sick to my stomach. Germany has, I think, about 8% FFH areas. FFH means flora, fauna, habitat. These are the areas that are particularly worthy of protection. That's okay. I have an area here and an area here, and in between I have fields or pastures or forests. And now the EU comes along and says, Germany, you have violated a rule. We have determined that 20% of your total area will be FFH areas. That's how I remember it. That means we have something worth protecting here of 8%. How do I get to 20%? I take the best acreage in between and make an A to B corridor. Decadence says hello. That means the best arable land, which is optimally managed with the most modern methods, with the most modern technology, is now being converted into FFH areas. That means 20% of our land remains free, worthy of special protection. But the theater continues, because it is still possible to produce in FFH areas. So we will then have an insect protection law. This insect protection law is a special joke, because it doesn't even know which insect is supposed to be protected. It also doesn't know how the insect should be protected, because we don't know which one we want to protect. It doesn't know anything, actually. And we have asked our politicians in Berlin, Insect Protection Act, why do you want to enforce it? What is it actually? What is this shit? The answer? It's in the coalition agreement. The SPD demanded it. Then I have to take 1.4 million hectares out of production because of an insect protection law. At certain times, there were over 1,000 farmers with their tractors in Berlin. We demonstrated for 80 days, starting the 25th of this year in Berlin, 25th of January, at minus 18 degrees. And with the coronavirus, we suffered everything, endured everything, even our politicians. Well, I can testify about that because I registered this demonstration over the entire time, over the entire term, and I have experienced hardships beyond imagination. But we have also achieved something. We have managed to ensure that, for example, bird sanctuaries can continue to be supported through agricultural subsidies. Because I have a sheep farm in a bird sanctuary, which are also sometimes natural reserves, which are grazed by my sheep, kept free for ground nesting birds and for all kinds of things. And that supposedly should have no longer been supported. That means I would have received no more money, only paid rent for the lambs. We have not been earning enough to cover our costs for a long time anyway. That means I would have stopped sheep farming. But the agricultural area which is not being used for grazing is being used for soy, bio-healthy drinks, and whatever sewage there is. Sorry, that's my opinion. I always have to say that. At some point, I'll be punished for it. So this area would have been taken out of production. Areas where, without disturbing anyone, we produce meat as part of landscape management. So, and before I go into the barn, one more thing about nature conservation, and one more thing about wolves. Germany has found another means to abolish agriculture. Wolves. In Scandinavia, I think Finland, Sweden, Norway, there are altogether 400 to 500 wolves. Germany alone now has well over 2,300 wolves. And that's with our densely populated areas. A study for the Ministry of Environment says Germany is ready for 20,000 wolves. As I said, we already have well over 2,000. But we're ready for 20,000. I've still found few wolves that eat carrots anywhere. Well, they go for feral animals, but they also go into the grazing animals. My farm used to have 2,500 ewes. We raised 1.64 lambs per ewe. Anyone can do the math. About 4,000 lambs a year. Then came the wolves. We had over 200 attacks. The worst damage is actually not the damage from the bite and from killing 1 to 2 animals. That would still be tolerable. The worst damage is the psychological damage to the sheep. Unimaginable. Afterwards, they run against the wall in the barn if you put them in there. They don't eat anymore, they die. That means we then went from 1.64 lambs per sheep per year down to 0.53. Our stock has been decimated to just over 1,000 because I'm only reimbursed for the one sheep directly killed. We had an encroachment of wolves. 74 sheep trampled each other to death on the run. You have to imagine a corridor through which over 2,000 sheep have to pass. Whoever stumbles loses. We lost 74 sheep in one day. And we're told, sorry, no wolf DNA, no compensation. Then so many died afterwards from internal injuries. The sheep pushed out the fetuses as they ran away. I could show you pictures that would make me cry again. And that is the situation in Germany. And meanwhile, the wolves also go to the cattle, to the horses. And what's the state doing? We have put pressure on it. There is now a little compensation for sheep farming, but not much. So my damage, my total damage, with repayment of subsidies because a broken herd can no longer manage land, in recent years was just under 1 million. If I extrapolate everything, the loss of animal and subsidy repayment, loss of leased land and so forth, then I come to €1 million damaged by the wolves. We were actually screwed by the wolves. Excuse me, but I can't find any other words to describe it. And that's actually the next thing that's going to ruin agriculture, with the wolf. And if the wolf doesn't do it, then they also have bears. That's how far we've gotten in the meantime. But as if that is not bad enough, imagine, they just said the federal states, for example, where I am in Thuringia, the entire state of Thuringia was just declared a wolf protection area. That means if tomorrow the wolf goes into a herd of cattle and they run from panic on the road and a school bus crashes and the children die, no one will say that was a wolf and that's how nature is and that's a higher force and then it's actually not so bad. No, the public prosecutor comes. And what does the prosecutor do? The prosecutor says the following: you have a herd in wolf territory. The herd is not protected. They are to blame. And on top of the guilt that this animal owner is already feeling anyway, if he doesn't go to the barn in despair and hang himself from the highest beam, he is also sued and he loses his business liability. And. Under the smoke screen of protecting nature, no one gives a shit anymore. This is happening in Germany. I'm sorry, but nature conservation is the biggest whore that is driven through the village. Under this guise, everything that is still somewhat normal here, that maintains the landscape, that operates clean pasture management, operates clean agriculture, is destroyed. It's destroying family farms. It's destroying everything. It's actually just causing more hunger. And every year, 70 million more are added. I can't think of anything else. I wanted to bring this addendum, but now I really have to go back to the barn.
Thank you, Mr. Schmidt, for this really nightmare what you described. And I think, I'm sure people, you opened the eyes of many people who didn't believe yet that this is an evil policy which aims at destroying not only food production, but population. So we have now, I believe, Robert Baker. Bob is the Schiller Institute Agricultural Advisor, and he is at the Kansas Cattlemen's Convention, if I'm not wrong, and we have a live report. David, can you confirm? Okay, let's hear it.
Hello, I'm Bob Baker. I'm in Kansas. I'm at the Kansas State Convention of the Kansas Cattlemen. Kansas is one of the largest producers of beef and wheat in the world. And we are joining together with food producers around the world to stop hunger. We have passed a resolution to restore the Glass-Steagall Act for bank re-regulation, and I would like you to hear greetings from the President and Vice President of the Kansas Cattlemen's Association to your conference. Bob Baker, I'm with the Schiller Institute, and we're here at the Kansas State Cattle Convention, and I'm with the President, Riley.
Yeah, I'm Riley Robbins. I'm the current president of the Kansas Cattlemen's Association, fighting for the independent cattle producers. I appreciate what you guys are doing and wish you guys a good conference.
I'm John Nye with the Kansas Cattlemen's Association from Dodge City, Kansas, and I wish greetings to the Schiller Institute, and I hope you have a great conference.
Okay, I think I know that most of you want to go on longer to have a discussion and listen to presentations, but we have to close down here. We are in the middle of the night in Europe, and I think we can announce the continuation of the conference tomorrow. We have the third panel, which starts at 10 a.m. East Coast time. This is 4 p.m. Central European time, and as I announced before, this will deal with there are no limits to growth in the universe, and we will have a long list of experts and scientists. We will have this will be moderated by Jason Ross. He will be moderated, by Megan Dobrot, who is the president of the Schiller Institute. And we have Jason Ross, who is our science liaison. Then we have Dr. Augustinus Berghout from the Netherlands, who is the initiator of CleanTel, which is an international group of scientists. Then we have Professor Sergei Pulinets from Russia. We have Professor Karl Otto Weiss from Germany. We have Maram Kairé, an astronomer from Senegal. We have Dr. Kelvin Clem from South Africa. State Senator Mike Thompson, who is a meteorologist from the US, and Caleb Mopin, who is the founder of the Center for Political Innovation. Most of you know him from his news reports in Washington for RT. And then concluding, we will have Professor Franco Battaglia from Italy, who is the initiator of the petition of 1,000 scientists, there is no climate emergency. So I hope you will stay with us tomorrow. And with this, I say thank you for listening and watching, and good night and good evening to everybody.